The morning sun hadn't cleared the tree line when Naruto arrived at Training Ground 7, and already he knew the day was going to be annoying. 3 teams stood in loose clusters across the field. Team 8, Team 10, and what remained of Team 7, which at this point was really just Naruto and Sakura, since Sai was on an Anbu rotation. And Kakashi had been pulled into some classified briefing that probably involved reading his book behind a folder. Sakura stood beside him with her arms crossed, watching the other teams filter in with the expression of someone who had better things to do, which she absolutely did, because Tsunade had her elbow deep in hospital rotations most days now. "Why are we here again?" Naruto asked. "Joint training exercise, inter-team coordination drills." Sakura didn't look at him. Tsunade-sama ordered it. Something about the next generation needs to function as a cohesive unit, not a collection of rival cliques. That sounds like something she'd say after drinking. "It was in an official memo, Naruto." "She can drink and write memos." Sakura almost smiled. Almost. Across the field, Shikamaru leaned against a post with his hands in his pockets and his eyes half closed, the universal Nara signal for "I'm here physically, but spiritually, I'm watching clouds." Ino stood next to him, already talking at Hinata, who nodded along politely while Kiba argued with Shino about something that involved aggressive hand gestures and a bark from Akamaru. And at the center of it all, standing with her back straight and her red eyes catching the early light, was Kurenai Yuhai. She looked the way she always looked, composed, precise, like someone who had never once in her life tripped over a tree root or spilled tea on herself. Her dark hair fell in loose waves, and she held a clipboard, which in Naruto's experience meant someone was about to get organized whether they wanted to be or not. "All right," Kurenai called out, and the field quieted. "You've all been told the basics. Today's exercise is about Genjutsu awareness and disruption in a team context. The ability to recognize when a teammate is caught in an illusion and break them free is one of the most underrated survival skills a shinobi can develop." She paced slowly in front of the assembled genin and chunin. "Most of you rely on brute force or ninjutsu in the field. That's fine until someone with real genjutsu capability decides to take you apart. You won't see it coming. You won't feel it happening. And by the time your teammate notices you're standing still with glazed eyes in the middle of a battlefield, you might already be dead." Naruto shifted his weight. He didn't love genjutsu training. Not because he couldn't handle it. He'd gotten a lot better, actually, thanks to some techniques he'd been developing on his own. But because every genjutsu exercise inevitably turned into a demonstration of how bad Naruto Uzumaki was at genjutsu, and he was tired of being the example. "We'll be running scenarios in pairs," Kurenai continued. "One person casts, one person disrupts. I'll be cycling through to test each pair personally." "She's going to wreck us," Kiba muttered, loud enough that several people heard. "She always does this thing where she layers 3 illusions, and the one you break out of is actually the 4th one." "That's the point," Shino said quietly. The teams split off. Naruto found himself paired with Hinata, which was fine. She was gentle with genjutsu practice, and her Byakugan made her a natural at spotting disruptions in chakra flow. They ran through the basics. He cast a simple environmental distortion, making the trees appear to lean inward, and she disrupted it before he'd even finished the hand signs. Then she caught him in a subtle one where the ground beneath his feet appeared to soften into mud, and he had to admit it took him a full 4 seconds to notice. "You're getting better, Naruto-kun," Hinata said softly. 4 seconds is still too slow." "It used to be 12, he grinned. "Progress." They cycled through partners. Naruto worked with Shikamaru next, who was so lazy about casting genjutsu that his illusions felt half-hearted, like dreams you could tell weren't real because nothing in them was fully rendered. Then Ino, who was sharp and aggressive and caught him in a sensory distortion that made his own hands look like they were melting. He broke that one in 2 seconds, and she looked genuinely surprised. The sun climbed. The air warmed. By mid-morning, Naruto had settled into the rhythm of it and was almost enjoying himself. That was when Kurenai appeared in front of him. "Uzumaki," she said. "You're with me." The field didn't go silent, the other pairs were still working, but Naruto felt a shift in attention. Peripheral glances. Kiba pausing mid-sentence to watch. "Sure." Naruto rolled his shoulders. "You casting or me?" Something flickered across her face, amusement maybe, or the echo of it. "I'll cast first. Your job is to recognize the illusion and break free. Straightforward." Straightforward, got it. She made no hand signs that he could see. The world didn't change. That was the first warning. Good Genjutsu didn't announce itself with wavering edges or dramatic shifts. It simply replaced one reality with another, seamlessly, like swapping a page in a book. Naruto stood in the training field. The sun was warm. Hinata was practicing with Shino 20 meters away. Everything was normal, except his shadow was pointing the wrong direction. He almost missed it. The sun was in the east, climbing, which meant his shadow should be stretching westward. It was pointing north. A tiny detail. The kind of thing most people's brains would autocorrect and ignore. He focused his chakra. Kai. The world rippled and reformed, still the training field. But now the shadows were correct. Hinata was still there. Shino was still there. Everything was wait. Where was Sakura? She'd been standing near the eastern post a minute ago. He focused again. Kai. Another ripple. The field shifted slightly. The trees at the edge were different species now, which meant the previous layer had been substituting them. He was in a layered genjutsu, just like Kiba had warned. Each disruption peeled back one layer to reveal another, and each subsequent layer was more accurate, harder to distinguish from reality. Naruto paused. He could keep breaking layers one by one, but Kurenai could stack them faster than he could peel them. That was her game. She wanted him to exhaust himself chasing the exit while she just kept wrapping him in another shell. He had two options. The brute force approach, flood his system with chakra and shatter everything at once, which worked, but was the equivalent of knocking down a house to open a door. Or he chose the third option, the one he'd been developing in private. Instead of disrupting outward, he turned his awareness inward. He'd been studying Fuinjutsu for over a year now, quietly, without telling anyone, poring over the fragments of Uzumaki sealing texts that Jiraiya had collected, experimenting in his apartment late at night with brush and ink and chakra. The thing about seals was that they were language. They were grammar. And Genjutsu, at its core, was a sentence someone else was writing on your brain, so what if you could edit the sentence? He didn't break the Genjutsu. He found it, felt the threads of foreign chakra woven through his perception like ink lines on a page, and instead of tearing them out, he simply read them, mapped them, understood the structure, 7 layers. She'd built 7 layers in the time it took him to blink. The woman was an artist. He opened his eyes, his real eyes, not the ones the Genjutsu was showing him, and said, 7 layers, right? The first one was the shadow. Second was the missing person. 3rd through 6th were progressive environmental corrections designed to make me think I'd broken free. And the 7th. He paused, feeling for it. The 7th is this conversation. You and I aren't actually standing this close together in the real world, are we? On the other side of the Genjutsu, in the real training ground 7, Kurenai's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. Naruto couldn't see that, but he felt her surprise through the texture of the chakra connecting them. A tiny stutter in the weave. Kai, he said, and this time he meant it, pushing the disruption through all 7 layers simultaneously with a precision that cost him almost nothing. The illusion shattered. He was standing 6 meters from Kurenai, not 2. The other shinobi had paused their exercises to watch. Kiba's mouth was open. Kurenai studied him for a long moment. You've improved. Thanks. You identified the layer count. That's unusual for someone with your profile. My profile? She chose her words carefully, which Naruto found he didn't appreciate. You've always been a direct fighter, power-based. Genjutsu recognition at that level requires a type of subtlety that I'm not known for. That you haven't demonstrated before, she corrected. But the meaning was the same and they both knew it. Something hot prickled under his ribs. Not anger exactly, something closer to the exhaustion that comes from a fight you've been having your entire life and can't seem to win. The fight to be seen as something other than what everyone decided he was when he was 12. "Your turn to cast," Kurenai said. "Show me what you can do." This was the part where he was supposed to fail. He could see it in the way she settled her weight, relaxed and ready, the way a parent might brace themselves for a child's drawing, prepared to be kind about something clumsy. Naruto knew what the smart play was. Cast something basic. Demonstrate competence. Earn a nod and a good effort. And move on, but the hot thing under his ribs wasn't cooling down. It was feeding on every time someone had looked at him and seen a ceiling instead of a floor. Every assumption, every profile. "Ready?" he asked. "Whenever you are." He'd been working on this technique for 3 months. It didn't have a name yet. It wasn't traditional Genjutsu. It couldn't be, because his chakra control, despite massive improvement, still wasn't fine enough to weave the kind of delicate perceptual illusions that Kurenai specialized in. What he had was something else. An ocean of chakra so vast it was practically gravitational, and a set of Uzumaki seal formulas that could structure that chakra into something with architecture. Traditional Genjutsu was a painting hung over a window. It covered your view of reality with a crafted image. What Naruto had built was more like a room. You didn't just see it, you were in it. The sheer density of chakra didn't trick your senses into perceiving something false. It created a space that felt real because, on a chakra level, it nearly was. He formed 3 hand signs, ram, snake, tiger, and then did something Kurenai had never seen anyone do. He pressed his right thumb to the inside of his left wrist, where a seal formula was inked in a tight spiral invisible under his sleeve, and he pushed. Kurenai didn't feel the Genjutsu take hold. What she felt was a door opening. She was standing in a kitchen. Sunlight came through a window above the sink, the kind of thick golden afternoon light that meant the day was more than half over. Something was cooking on the stove. She could smell it, rich and savory, miso broth with pork and something green. The kitchen was small but not cramped, with wooden counters worn smooth by use and a collection of mismatched cups hanging from hooks beneath a shelf. She knew this kitchen. That was the thing that made her breath catch. She didn't recognize it. She knew it, the way you know a place you've lived in for years, where your hand finds the light switch in the dark without thinking. There was a child's drawing pinned to the wall next to the refrigerator. A stick figure family, 3 people, done in bright crayon. The tallest figure had red eyes and dark hair. The shortest had what appeared to be whisker marks on its cheeks. The figure in the middle, the child, had dark red hair and was smiling enormously. Kurenai stared at the drawing. Her hand was resting on the counter. She was wearing a ring. The front door opened somewhere behind her, and a voice she recognized but had never heard sound like this. Warm, easy, carrying the particular softness of someone arriving at a place they loved, called out, "I'm home." Footsteps, the sound of a jacket being hung on a hook. And then Naruto Uzumaki walked into the kitchen. Older by maybe 5 years, taller, broader in the shoulders, with his hitai hanging loose around his neck and a grocery bag in one hand. He set the bag on the counter and looked at her with an expression so openly affectionate that it hit her like a physical thing, a warmth in the center of her chest that radiated outward. "You started dinner already." He leaned over the stove and breathed in. "Oh, that's the good miso." "What's the occasion?" She opened her mouth to say this is a Genjutsu, release me, and what came out was, "Mikoto's parent-teacher meeting went well. I thought we could celebrate." The words weren't hers, except they were. They'd come from her mouth, shaped by her voice, and the terrifying thing was that they'd felt natural. As if this were a conversation she'd had variations of 100 times. As if the name Mikoto, their daughter's name, her brain supplied helpfully, horrifyingly, was as familiar as her own. Naruto grinned. She did, what they say. Top of her class in Genjutsu theory. Her teacher said she has an instinctive grasp of perceptual manipulation. I wonder where she gets that. Definitely you. He was unpacking the grocery bag, vegetables, rice, a bottle of something. I can barely make a clone look right. You made a clone that punched a god in the face. That's different. That's just hitting things with extra steps. She wanted to scream. She wanted to break this, shatter it, tear it apart with her hands if her chakra wouldn't cooperate. She was Kurenai Yuhai. She was a jounin of Konohagakure. She was the foremost Genjutsu specialist in the village, and she was standing in a kitchen wearing a ring and talking about their daughter, and she couldn't find the edges of the illusion because there were no edges. There was no painting hung over a window. She was inside a room, and the room had walls and floors and a ceiling, and the air had weight, and the light had warmth, and the man standing in front of her smelled like autumn leaves and wood smoke, and she could feel the ring on her finger, cool metal against skin. And she tried to gather her chakra for a disruption and found that it was like trying to push water uphill. The density of the Genjutsu wasn't a barrier, it was an atmosphere, it was gravity itself. Her own chakra moved through it like swimming through honey. Hey. Naruto, the illusory Naruto, the construct, she reminded herself fiercely, was looking at her with concern. You okay? You went somewhere for a second. I'm fine, she heard herself say, and hated how steady her voice sounded, how content. The front door banged open again. Small, rapid footsteps. Mama, Papa, guess what, guess what, guess what? A girl exploded into the kitchen. Maybe 5 years old, dark red hair in 2 messy braids, red eyes like Kurenai's set in a face that had Naruto's jawline and his whisker marks, faint but visible. She was vibrating with the particular energy of a child who had news that could not wait 1 more second. Kurenai's chest cracked open, not physically. Not even in the Genjutsu's reality. Something deeper than that. A fault line she hadn't known existed, running through the center of who she was, split apart by the sight of this child, this impossible, fictional, fabricated child, looking up at her with absolute trust and delight. What is it, little fox? Naruto scooped the girl up and she shrieked with laughter as he settled her on his hip. Iruka-sensei said my chakra paper did 2 things, fire and wind. He said that almost never happens. 2 affinities. Naruto looked at Kurenai over the girl's head, and his eyes were shining. Did you hear that? Kurenai was supposed to be breaking the Genjutsu. She was supposed to be analyzing, disrupting, demonstrating why she was the best in the village at this particular art. Instead, she was looking at a daughter she'd never had, feeling a love she'd never felt, and the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that the love was real. The Genjutsu hadn't manufactured it. It had reached into her and found something already there, some buried, starving thing that wanted this, wanted a home that smelled like miso and a child with red eyes and a man who walked through the door and said I'm home like those 2 words meant everything. The kitchen was warm. The light was gold. Mikoto was describing her day in the breathless, non-linear way children do, ping-ponging between topics with the assumption that the adults in her life could keep up and cared about all of it. And Kurenai, who had been alone since Asuma died, who had folded that grief into herself so tightly that it became structural, who had not allowed herself to want anything this soft in years. Kurenai listened, and responded, and felt the ring on her finger. She lived in the Genjutsu for what felt like 3 hours. They ate dinner. Mikoto showed them a jutsu she'd learned, a tiny, flickering illusion that made a butterfly appear on her palm, trembling and imperfect and beautiful. Naruto pretended to be scared of it, and Mikoto laughed until she fell off her chair. They cleaned up together. Kurenai washed dishes while Naruto dried, standing close enough that their arms touched. Mikoto was put to bed after a story, 2 stories, 3, and finally a promise that yes, Papa would teach her the Rasengan when she was older. No, not tomorrow. Yes, really? Then it was just the 2 of them in the kitchen, the house quiet, the lamp low. Naruto leaned against the counter and looked at her in a way that made her aware of every centimeter of space between them. Good day, he said. Yes, you seem far away tonight. She should have broken it then. She'd had the entire evening to work at the density of the Genjutsu, and she'd been making progress, tiny erosions in the chakra architecture, hairline fractures she could exploit. She was Kurenai Yuhai. She could do this. but she stood in the lamplight with a man who looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world, in a house that smelled like home, and for 5 more seconds, just 5, she let it be real. Then she detonated her chakra. The kitchen tore apart. The walls dissolved. The light collapsed. The ring vanished from her finger, leaving a band of cold where it had been. Everything fell away in pieces, like a painting shredding in a wind, and the last thing she saw before reality reasserted itself was the child's drawing on the wall, the stick figure family with their bright crayon smiles. And then that was gone too. Training Ground 7. Afternoon sun. The real one. Kurenai was on her knees in the grass. She didn't remember falling. Her chakra was wild, surging and ebbing in waves that matched the hammering of her pulse. Her hands were pressed flat against the ground, and she was breathing like she'd run a marathon, deep and ragged and not enough. The field was silent. Everyone was staring. Naruto stood where he'd been standing when he cast the jutsu, 6 meters away. He looked, scared, pale under his tan, blue eyes wide, like someone who had set off a firecracker and gotten an explosion. "Kurenai-sensei," Kiba took a step forward. "What?" "I'm fine." Her voice came out steady. Years of training, years of never showing the wound. "I'm fine, Kiba," she stood, her legs held, which she chose to consider a victory. She looked at Naruto across the field and saw him flinch good. He should flinch. "What was that?" she asked, quietly. The kind of quiet that made people lean back. Naruto's throat worked. I made a new technique, experimental. I didn't." "What was that?" "A Genjutsu." "No." She took a step toward him. "That was not Genjutsu. I know Genjutsu. I have trained in Genjutsu since I was 9 years old. I have studied under every Genjutsu master this village has produced. That was not Genjutsu, Uzumaki. What did you do to me?" The other shinobi were frozen. Hinata had her hands over her mouth. Shikamaru's eyes were fully open, which by itself was alarming. "It's a seal-based technique," Naruto said, and his voice was small in a way that didn't suit him. "I've been studying Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. The seals can structure chakra into, I don't know how to explain it. It's like building a space instead of painting a picture. The Genjutsu doesn't replace what you see, it creates a new place and puts you in it. And the content of this place, the scenario you chose for a training exercise, every word was a blade. You thought that was appropriate?" Naruto's jaw tightened. "I didn't choose the specifics. The technique pulls from the caster's chakra, and it fills in details on its own. I set the framework, and the seal does the rest. I've only tested it on clones before. I didn't know it would," he trailed off. He didn't know what it would do. That was the terrifying truth written all over his face. He'd built a weapon he didn't fully understand and pointed it at a colleague. "What did he show you?" Kiba asked, looking between them. "What was the Genjutsu?" Kurenai said nothing. "It's not important," Naruto said quickly. "It is clearly important," Shikamaru said from his post, and his voice had the particular flatness it took on when he was already 3 steps into analyzing something. "You're both white as sheets. Kurenai-sensei was inside that technique for," he glanced at the sun, calculating. Roughly 14 seconds of real time, but based on her disorientation, subjective time was significantly longer. Hours, maybe, and the emotional response suggests the content was personal. 14 seconds. She'd lived an entire evening in 14 seconds. This training exercise is over. Kurenai said. She turned to the assembled shinobi. "You're all dismissed. Good work today." "But," Kiba started. "Dismissed, Kiba," they scattered, slowly, reluctantly, with backward glances. Shikamaru was the last to go, and the look he gave Naruto was complicated, concern and curiosity and something sharper, a suspicion taking shape. Then it was just the 2 of them in the field. Kurenai turned to Naruto. He stood his ground, but barely. "You will never use that technique on another person without full understanding of what it does. Am I clear?" "Yes. And if you ever use it on me again, I won't." She held his gaze for a long moment. He looked miserable. Young and miserable and scared, and a small part of her, the part that was a teacher before she was anything else, recognized that he hadn't meant harm. He'd wanted to prove himself. He'd been stung by her assumptions, and had lashed out with the most impressive thing in his arsenal, the way 17-year-olds do when their pride is bruised. But understanding why someone hurt you didn't mean it hadn't hurt. "Go home, Naruto." He went. Kurenai stood alone in training ground 7 as the afternoon shadows lengthened. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the rhythm beneath, steady and reliable and belonging entirely to her. The ring. She could still feel where it had been. A ghost of pressure around her finger, persistent as a memory. She rubbed her hand, and it didn't fade. Naruto's apartment was a mess. It was always a mess, but today the mess felt hostile. All the scattered scrolls and empty ramen cups and ink-stained papers, a testament to the fact that he lived alone, and had always lived alone, and would probably always live alone, because he was the kind of person who built experimental genjutsu out of spite and hurt people with it. He sat on the floor with his back against his bed and tried to figure out exactly how badly he'd messed up. The technique, he'd been calling it Uzumaki seal art, interior world, in his notes, which he now realized was a terrible name, had worked. That was the problem. It had worked far, far better than it was supposed to. The tests on shadow clones had produced stable illusory environments, sure, but the clones had always reported the experiences as kinda hazy and like a dream you're lucid in. Nothing approaching what he'd seen on Kurenai's face when she broke free. She'd been in tears. No, not in tears. Kurenai Yuhai didn't cry in front of people. But her eyes had been red in a way that had nothing to do with their natural color, and the sound she'd made when she hit the ground was a sound he never wanted to hear again. He pulled the scroll toward him, the one with the seal formula he'd used. The base architecture was adapted from an Uzumaki binding seal, a type of formula designed to create persistent connections between a seal and its target. He'd modified it to serve as the shell. For the Genjutsu space, reasoning that a binding seal's persistence would make the illusory environment more stable and convincing. The thought occurred to him now, belatedly and with dawning horror, that modifying a binding seal without fully understanding what binding meant in Uzumaki Fuinjutsu might have been a catastrophically stupid thing to do. He spread the scroll out and stared at the formula. The outer ring was standard containment architecture. The inner matrices handled sensory projection and environmental generation. But the core, the very center of the seal, the part he'd adapted from the binding formula, was doing something he didn't recognize. The ink was different. When he'd drawn this formula, every stroke had been the same shade of deep black. Now the core characters had shifted to a dark, bruised purple, as if the ink itself had been stained from the inside. Naruto touched the characters with his fingertip. A jolt ran through him, not pain, not exactly, but a sensation of recognition, like hearing a voice you haven't heard in years. Warmth, kitchen light, miso broth, the weight of a child in his arms. He jerked his hand back. What the hell, he breathed. He shouldn't have been able to feel that. He was the caster, not the target. The illusory environment existed in Kurenai's perception, built from his chakra, but experienced by her. He shouldn't have access to the memories of what she'd experienced inside, unless the binding seal at the core hadn't just created a stable shell for the Genjutsu. Unless it had done what binding seals were designed to do, unless it had bound them. Naruto stared at the purple-stained ink and felt the first cold trickle of genuine fear. He needed to talk to someone. Not Kurenai, she'd kill him. Not Kakashi, he wasn't available. Not Sakura, she'd kill him and then heal him and then kill him again. Jiraiya was dead. The Uzumaki clan was gone. Tsunade. He needed Tsunade. She knew more about sealing than anyone left alive, except maybe, no. He pushed that thought away. He was not going to Danzo Shimura for help with anything, ever. Tsunade it was. Tomorrow, he'd go to the Hokage Tower first thing in the morning, confess everything, and accept whatever punishment was coming. He stood up, rolled the scroll shut, and shoved it under his mattress with the paranoid urgency of someone hiding evidence. Then he went to the kitchen, his real kitchen, which was nothing like the one in the Genjutsu, cramped and dingy and smelling faintly of expired milk, and made instant ramen because it was all he had. He ate standing over the sink. The noodles tasted like nothing. That night, he lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the way the illusory Kurenai had looked at him in the lamplight, like he was someone worth coming home to. Tried not to think about the child with the dark red hair and the whisker marks and the butterfly trembling on her palm. He failed at not thinking about all of it. Across the village, in an apartment significantly cleaner and more tastefully furnished, Kurenai Yuhai was conducting a systematic audit of her own chakra system. She sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, eyes closed, cycling her chakra through its pathways with the meticulous attention of a doctor examining herself for disease. The Genjutsu was broken. She'd broken it herself. There should be no residual effects, and yet there was something. A thread. No, thinner than a thread. A filament, barely perceptible, woven into the flow of her chakra like a single strand of spider silk in a river. She could feel it because she was Kurenai Yuhai and her chakra sensitivity was among the sharpest in the village, but even for her, it was like trying to see a single star through clouds. The filament wasn't doing anything. It wasn't disrupting her chakra flow or altering her perception. It was simply there, a foreign presence in her system so subtle that anyone less attuned would never notice it. She tried to isolate it. The moment she focused on it directly, it seemed to slip sideways, like a word on the tip of her tongue. She could feel its texture, warm, dense, bright, unmistakably him, but she couldn't grasp it. Naruto's chakra was in her system. A trace amount. A residue of the Genjutsu, maybe, or something else. She opened her eyes and looked down at her hands. At her left ring finger, where a ring she'd never owned had sat for what felt like hours. The skin was unmarked. Of course it was. There had been no real ring, but she could feel it. She pressed her thumb against the base of that finger and felt a pulse of warmth that didn't belong to her. A beat, like a second heartbeat, distant and steady. Kurenai Yuhai had not felt another person's heartbeat since Asuma Sarutobi lay dying in her arms on a dirt road in Fire Country, while she told him she was pregnant with a child she would raise alone. She hadn't been pregnant. That had been a lie, a desperate comfort for a dying man. There was no child. There had never been a child, until tonight. Until a 17-year-old boy who had no idea what he was doing had built a world from chakra and sealing ink, and given her a daughter with red eyes and whisker marks who could make butterflies with her hands. Kurenai pressed her palms flat against the floor and breathed until the tightness in her chest released. Then she got up. She made tea. She drank it standing at the window, watching the village lights flicker in the dark. She ran through her evening stretches and her meditation and her nightly security check, the same routine she'd performed every night for years, the rituals of a woman who had learned to live alone and be fine with it. She got into bed. The sheets were cool. The apartment was silent. She lay on her side and stared at the wall and waited for sleep. It came slowly. Fitfully. She hovered on the edge of it for a long time, drifting in the space between waking and not, and then, very softly, she felt it, warmth. Not from the blankets, not from the radiator. A warmth that had shape, that pressed against her back like a body that wasn't there, like someone lying behind her in the bed, close enough to touch, but just barely not touching. Her eyes snapped open. She was alone. The bed was empty, but the warmth remained. She lay rigid in the dark, every instinct screaming, every analytical faculty working at full speed. This was a residual effect, a chakra echo. It was the filament in her system resonating with something. A memory from the Genjutsu, sense data that hadn't fully purged. That was the rational explanation. The warmth shifted, just slightly, as if the person who wasn't there had turned in their sleep. Kurenai pressed her face into her pillow and did not cry because she was Kurenai Yuhai, and she had not cried since Asuma, and she was not going to start now over a ghost of a Genjutsu and a boy who didn't know what he'd done. The warmth stayed. She didn't sleep for a long time. And when she finally did, She dreamed of a kitchen with golden light, and a child's drawing on the wall and the sound of a door opening, and a voice that said I'm home like it was the truest thing in the world. 3 blocks away, in a cramped apartment that smelled like instant ramen, Naruto Uzumaki woke from the same dream at the same moment, gasping, with tears on his face that he didn't remember crying. He pressed his hand to his chest. Beneath his palm, on the inside of his wrist, the seal he'd used to cast the Genjutsu was glowing faintly. A dim, bruised purple, warm to the touch. He watched it pulse once, twice, 3 times, in perfect rhythm with a heartbeat that wasn't his. "Oh no," he whispered to the dark. The seal pulsed again, steady, patient, waiting. Chapter 2. Echo's Naruto didn't go to Tsunade first thing in the morning. He meant to. He woke up with the intent fully formed, dragged himself out of bed, splashed water on his face, and stood in front of his bathroom mirror looking at someone who hadn't slept enough and knew he was in trouble. The seal on his inner wrist had stopped glowing sometime before dawn, but the skin around it was tender, faintly bruised like a healing burn. He pressed it and felt nothing. No warmth, no phantom heartbeat, just skin and ink and the dull ache of something that had been active for too long. He got dressed. He ate a protein bar because even he couldn't stomach ramen at 6 in the morning on no sleep. He grabbed the scroll with his seal notes, shoved it in his jacket, and opened his front door, and found Shikamaru leaning against the railing outside. "Morning," Shikamaru said, as if he'd been waiting there for precisely the amount of time required and not 1 second more. "How long have you been out here?" 20 minutes. I figured you'd be up early. People who screw up badly enough tend to lose sleep over it." Naruto stepped outside and closed the door. "I'm on my way to see Tsunade." "Good. I'll walk with you." They descended the stairs in silence. The village was waking around them, shopkeepers opening shutters, a genin team jogging past in formation, the distant bark of a dog that might or might not have been Akamaru. Morning in Konoha had a rhythm, a pulse, and Naruto had been attuned to it since childhood, the way you learn the moods of a place that never quite accepted you. Shikamaru walked beside him with his hands in his pockets and said nothing for 2 full blocks, which was either companionable silence or tactical patience, and with Shikamaru, it was always the latter. "You going to ask me?" Naruto said finally. "I was going to let you volunteer it." "What if I don't? Then I'll ask, but it's less troublesome if you start." Naruto blew out a breath. They turned onto the main road that led toward the Hokage Tower, and the foot traffic picked up around them. "I built a new technique," Naruto said, keeping his voice low. "Seal-based Genjutsu. I've been working on it for months. Tested it on shadow clones. It worked fine. Stable environments, controllable duration, easy to spell. So when Kurenai-sensei told me to cast something on her, I thought..." He trailed off. "You thought it would be impressive." "I thought it would prove I'm not what everyone thinks I am." The words came out harder than he intended. "Every exercise, every spar, every mission brief, I'm the power guy, the brute force option. Naruto will punch it, Naruto will Rasengan it, Naruto will throw 1,000 clones at it. Nobody ever thinks I can do something subtle. So you used an untested technique on one of the village's most skilled jounin to prove a point about subtlety." Shikamaru's tone was bone dry. "That's very you. I know." "What did the Genjutsu show her?" Naruto was quiet for a moment. A cart rumbled past them on the road, pulled by a tired-looking ox. 2 chunin he vaguely recognized nodded to him, and he nodded back automatically. "A life," he said. "A domestic life. Me and her, married with a kid." Shikamaru stopped walking. Naruto took 2 more steps before he realized and turned back. Shikamaru was staring at him with an expression he'd never seen on the Nara's face before, not the usual lazy calculation, not the dry amusement, but something raw and unfiltered. Shock, maybe. Or the particular look of a genius encountering a variable he hadn't accounted for. "You cast a Genjutsu on Kurenai Yuhai," Shikamaru said slowly, "in which she was your wife. I didn't choose the content. The technique generates it from the caster's chakra. I set the framework, domestic scenario was the baseline parameter, and the seal fills in the details. I didn't know it would. You didn't know it would cast her as the wife. No, the tests on clones produced generic environments, featureless people. I figured it would make some vague house with blurry faces. But it didn't. No, Shikamaru rubbed the bridge of his nose. The seal pulled the details from your chakra, from your subconscious, which means on some level the scenario it built was, don't. Naruto's voice was sharp enough to cut. Don't finish that sentence. Shikamaru looked at him for a long moment, then resumed walking. Naruto fell into step beside him, his face burning. There's more, Naruto said after a block of silence. After last night I could feel... He struggled with the words. The seal on my wrist was glowing, and I could feel a heartbeat that wasn't mine. And I had a dream, the same scenario, the kitchen, the kid, and I think she might have had the same dream at the same time. Shikamaru's pace didn't change, but Naruto saw his eyes sharpen the way they did when he was processing something at speed, the mental equivalent of a dog catching a scent. Show me the seal. Naruto pushed up his sleeve. The spiral formula on his inner left wrist was still there. Dark ink on tanned skin, but the core characters, the ones adapted from the Uzumaki binding seal, had shifted further into that bruised purple color. In daylight, they looked almost alive. The ink seemed to move slightly when viewed from the corner of the eye. Shikamaru didn't touch it. He leaned close, studying the characters with the intensity of someone reading a coded message. I don't read Uzumaki's script fluently, he said. But I've studied enough sealing theory to recognize binding architecture when I see it. These core characters, they're connective, right? Designed to create a persistent link between the seal and a target? Yeah. I used them as the foundation for the Genjutsu space. The idea was that a binding seal's persistence would make the environment more stable. And instead of just binding the Genjutsu space to her perception, it bound you to her. The words landed like stones in water. Naruto felt them sink. I think so, he said quietly. What kind of binding seal, specifically? There are different types in the Uzumaki tradition. Some are informational, they share data between linked seals. Some are structural, they reinforce each other. And some are... He stopped. Naruto watched his face and saw the moment the deduction completed. Some are relational, Shikamaru finished. Designed to formalize bonds between people, like marriage contracts. Naruto said nothing. His silence was loud enough. Tell me you didn't accidentally marry Kurenai Yuhai with a seal. I don't know what I did. That's why I'm going to Tsunade. They walked the rest of the way to the Hokage Tower without speaking. Tsunade was already having a bad morning. 2 border reports from the Land of Grass indicated unusual mercenary movements near the northern trade routes. The hospital budget review was overdue. Shizune had presented her with a stack of permit applications thick enough to use as a weapon. And her tea was cold. So when Naruto Uzumaki and Shikamaru Nara walked into her office at 7:30 in the morning, both wearing the particular expressions of people carrying news they didn't want to deliver, Tsunade felt a premonitory headache begin its slow march across her temples. Whatever it is, she said. I need you to be concise. Naruto was not concise. He started from the beginning, the Fuinjutsu studies, the seal development, the shadow clone tests, the training exercise, the Genjutsu, what the Genjutsu contained, and the aftermath. He stammered through the domestic scenario, turned red when he had to explain the content, and nearly tripped over his own words describing the phantom heartbeat and the shared dream. Shikamaru, standing slightly behind and to the left, added clinical footnotes at key moments, translating Naruto's emotional narrative into technical observations. Together, they presented a picture that made Tsunade's headache accelerate into a full-blown migraine. Let me see the seal. She said when they finished. Naruto crossed to her desk and held out his wrist. Tsunade took his arm in both hands and turned it into the light, examining the formula with the focused intensity that had once made her the finest medic in the shinobi world. She was quiet for a long time. Her thumbs pressed gently against his wrist, and Naruto could feel the faint probe of medical chakra as she traced the seal's structure, following its pathways the way a surgeon follows veins. You adapted this from the Scroll of Whirlpool, Section 14, she asked without looking up. Section 16, actually. 14 was the standard containment array. 16 had the connective formulas. Section 16. Her voice was flat. The section Jureya annotated with, and I'm quoting from memory here, do not use without complete understanding of resonance chains. Underlined 3 times, with a skull drawn next to it, Naruto swallowed. I might have focused more on the formula itself than the annotations. Tsunade released his wrist. She sat back in her chair and looked at him the way a parent looks at a child who has swallowed something they found under the sink. Shikamaru, she said, close the door. Shikamaru closed the door. The office became very quiet. Morning light fell through the windows behind Tsunade's desk, casting long shadows across the floor. What you've done, Tsunade began, is taken Uzumaki resonance binding formula, a piece of sealing architecture designed to create a permanent sympathetic link between two people's chakra systems, and woven it into a Genjutsu framework. The Genjutsu acted as a delivery mechanism. When Kurenai experienced the illusory environment, her chakra system opened to receive the sensory data, the way it does with any Genjutsu. But instead of just receiving the illusion, it also received the binding seal. The seal installed itself in her chakra network during the experience, and because the experience was emotionally intense and subjectively long duration, the seal had time to root deeply. How deeply? Naruto asked. Tsunade was quiet for a beat too long. Let me examine Kurenai before I answer that. How deeply, Ba-chan? Deeply enough that you can feel each other's heartbeats across a village, Naruto. Deeply enough that you're sharing dreams. She leaned forward, elbows on the desk. The Uzumaki resonance seals were used for one primary purpose in the historical record. Do you know what that was? Shikamaru said relational bonds. Marriage. Not just marriage. The Uzumaki didn't do anything halfway. A resonance bond was a union of chakra systems. Two people, linked at the deepest level, sharing awareness, emotion, even sensory experience. The texts describe bonded pairs who could feel each other's pain, read each other's intentions, and find each other across any distance. She paused. They were also, by every account, irreversible. The word hit the room like a dropped blade. Irreversible, Naruto repeated. By every account, Tsunade emphasized. The Uzumaki clan is gone. Their records are fragmentary. There may be information we don't have about dissolution methods. But based on what I know, and I know more about Uzumaki sealing than anyone alive, resonance bonds were considered permanent. Shikamaru spoke from the doorway. You said the seal is still active, still evolving. What happens if it completes its installation? Tsunade's eyes moved to him. The historical descriptions suggest a full resonance bond results in complete sympathetic linking. Shared sensory experience, emotional transparency, instinctive awareness of the partner's location and state. Essentially, two people operating as a single system. Naruto stared at her. You're saying I accidentally, that Kurenai and I are. I'm saying I need to examine Kurenai before I make any definitive statements. I'm saying this is serious. And I'm saying, she stood, and her chair scraped back hard against the floor. I'm saying that if you ever use an Uzumaki formula you don't fully understand on another person again, I will personally remove your ability to mold chakra. Am I understood? Yes. Good, now go get Kurenai and bring her here, discreetly. The last thing any of us needs is this becoming village gossip. Naruto turned to leave. He was almost at the door when Tsunade's voice stopped him. Naruto? He looked back. Her expression had shifted, still stern, but with something softer underneath, something that looked almost like grief. The Uzumaki resonance bond was considered a sacred rite. It was a declaration of absolute trust between two people. It was never, in any recorded instance, performed accidentally. He didn't know what to say to that. He nodded and left. He found Kurenai in the last place he expected, waiting for him on the street outside the Hokage tower. She was leaning against the wall near the entrance, arms folded, watching the morning crowd pass. She wore a simple dark outfit, no flak jacket, her hair pulled back in a way he'd never seen before. She looked like she hadn't slept. He recognized the look because he was wearing it too. "I felt you coming," she said, and the words were precise and cold in the way that very frightened people's words are when they're using control as a shield. "About 10 minutes ago, like a tugging behind my ribs, it got stronger the closer you got." She turned her red eyes on him. "I assume that's not normal." "No." "And you've been to see the Hokage?" "Yeah, and she wants to see me." "Yeah," Kurenai pushed off the wall. "Then let's go." They walked into the tower together, side by side, and Naruto was acutely aware of the space between them, exactly an arm's length, maintained with deliberate precision. He could feel her. Not her thoughts, not her emotions, not clearly. But a presence, like a sound just below the threshold of hearing, a constant awareness at the edge of his perception that hadn't been there 24 hours ago. She could feel it too. He knew because, and this was the deeply unsettling part, he could feel that she could feel it. A feedback loop. Two mirrors facing each other with a candle between them, reflections multiplying into infinity. They didn't speak in the elevator. They didn't speak in the hallway. They arrived at Tsunade's office, and Naruto knocked, and Shikamaru opened the door and they walked in, and Kurenai stood in front of the Hokage's desk and said, "How bad is it?" Tsunade looked at her for a long moment. Then she gestured to the medical examination table that Shizune had set up in the corner of the office, while Naruto was gone. Standard diagnostic equipment, chakra monitoring seals, the works. "Sit down. Let me look." The examination took 40 minutes. Tsunade worked in silence, her hands glowing with diagnostic chakra, tracing Kurenai's chakra pathways with the thoroughness and focus that had earned her the title of greatest medical ninja in the world. Shikamaru watched from a chair in the corner, occasionally jotting notes in a small book. Naruto stood by the window and tried not to pace. He could feel the examination. Not the details, he couldn't feel Tsunade's chakra probing Kurenai's system, but the experience. The discomfort. The vulnerability of being studied like a specimen. A tight, held breath feeling that he eventually realized was Kurenai's self-control under pressure, translated through the bond as a kind of rigid warmth. 20 minutes in, Kurenai flinched. Not visibly, her body didn't move, but Naruto felt it like a plucked string, a sharp vibration that ran through the connection between them. "Found it," Tsunade said quietly. "Shizune, record this." Shizune, who had been standing by with a clipboard, stepped closer. Tsunade's hands hovered over Kurenai's sternum, glowing brighter. "The seal has embedded itself in the juncture between the heart meridian and the primary chakra reservoir. It's drawn a series of microchannels, I count 7, which matches the 7-layer structure of the original Genjutsu, connecting her core chakra pathways to an external resonance point. That resonance point is..." She trailed off and turned to look at Naruto. "Come here." He crossed the room. Tsunade took his left wrist and held it near Kurenai's chest, about a foot away. The seal on his wrist flared, not brightly, just a dim pulse of purple light, and Kurenai inhaled sharply. "Felt that?" Tsunade asked her. "Yes." Kurenai's voice was carefully controlled. "A pulling sensation." Toward him. Tsunade released Naruto's wrist and stepped back. She was quiet for long enough that the silence became its own diagnosis. "The resonance bond is partially installed," she said. "I'd estimate it's at roughly 30% integration. The 7 microchannels are open but not yet fully developed. At this stage, you're experiencing emotional bleed, proximity awareness, and probably shared dream states during sleep." 30%, Kurenai repeated. "What happens at 100? Full sympathetic linking." Shared sensory experience, emotional transparency, intuitive tactical coordination. In combat, a bonded pair was said to function as a single organism. In daily life, she hesitated, which was something Tsunade almost never did. In daily life, you would be continuously aware of each other. Not reading thoughts, the records are clear on that, but aware. Emotions, physical state, location, intent, constantly. "And it's progressing," Shikamaru said from his corner, "getting stronger over time. The channels are widening." "Yes." based on the rate of progression I'm seeing, full integration would occur in approximately 2 to 3 weeks without intervention. Then intervene, Kurenai said. Remove it. Tsunade sat on the edge of her desk. She didn't look old, she never did, thanks to her transformation technique, but in that moment, something ancient moved behind her eyes. Weariness that transcended appearance. I can't. 2 words. The room absorbed them. The seal isn't sitting on top of your chakra network, it's woven into it. Removing it would be like trying to remove a single color from a painting. You'd have to destroy the canvas to get it out. Any attempt to forcibly extract the seal risks catastrophic damage to your chakra system. We're talking potential permanent disability, loss of ability to mold chakra. Possibly death. Nobody spoke. The morning light had shifted as the examination progressed, the sun climbing past the windows and filling the office with a brightness that felt obscene given the conversation. What about the source? Shikamaru asked. Naruto's seal. If you disrupted the formula on his wrist, same problem. His end of the resonance is just as deeply rooted, and disrupting one side of a sympathetic bond doesn't dissolve it, it creates an imbalance. One person bearing the full weight of a connection designed for 2. The historical term for it translates roughly as the widowing sickness. The surviving accounts are not pleasant. Naruto felt something from Kurenai then. Not a specific emotion, the bond wasn't developed enough for that, but a quality. A texture. Cold and deep and very still, like the surface of a lake in winter. He recognized it instinctively, though he'd never felt it from outside before. It was what despair felt like when you were too disciplined to let it reach your face. There must be options, he said. The Uzumaki had to have a way to. The Uzumaki didn't need a way to undo it because they did it on purpose. Tsunade cut in. This was their most sacred right. 2 people choosing each other, permanently, with full knowledge and consent. They considered it the highest expression of trust. It was never accidental, which means there was never a need for a reversal procedure. Never documented doesn't mean never existed, Shikamaru said. Tsunade's eyes moved to him. Explain. The Uzumaki records are fragmentary, you said it yourself. We have maybe 10% of their sealing library. The rest was destroyed with Yuzashio or scattered across the continent. Just because the surviving texts don't contain a dissolution method doesn't mean one was never developed. Marriages end, people change. Even a culture that considered bonding sacred would have eventually encountered a situation where a bond needed to be broken. That's speculation. It's a reasonable inference, and it gives us something to work with. Shikamaru closed his notebook. The ruins of Yuzashio still exist. Expeditions have recovered fragments before. If there's a dissolution method, it's most likely to be found there. Tsunade considered this. That's a significant expedition. I can't authorize it based on a hypothesis. Then authorize it based on the fact that a partially completed resonance bond between 2 Konoha shinobi, one of whom is the village's Jinchuriki, represents a security concern that demands full investigation. Naruto blinked. He sometimes forgot that Shikamaru, underneath the laziness and the slouch and the cloud watching, was one of the most dangerous strategic minds in the village. Watching him frame the argument in terms Tsunade couldn't easily dismiss was like watching someone solve a puzzle by picking up one piece. Tsunade tapped her fingers on the desk. Not yet. Before I send anyone to Yuzashio, I want to understand the bond's current behavior and rate of progression. I want data. She turned to Kurenai and Naruto, which means I need both of you under observation. For how long? Kurenai asked. A week, minimum. I need daily examinations. I need you both keeping journals of symptoms, emotional bleed, shared dreams, proximity effects, everything, and I need you. She paused, as if bracing. Relatively close to each other. The temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. It was impressive, given that no one had actually done anything. Define relatively close, Kurenai said. Within the same district. Ideally within a few blocks. The bond is going to generate increasing amounts of sympathetic resonance, and if you're on opposite sides of the village, the strain on both your systems could cause problems. Headaches, disorientation, emotional instability. Proximity mitigates that. You want me to live near Naruto Uzumaki. I want you to live near each other, and since his apartment is closer to the hospital, it makes more logistical sense for you to relocate temporarily. Tsunade held up a hand as Kurenai opened her mouth. I'm not asking you to move in with him. There's an empty unit in his building, 1 floor down. I'll have it requisitioned today. You'll have your own space, your own privacy, but you'll need to be close enough that the bond doesn't destabilize your chakra. Kurenai's jaw was tight. Naruto could feel the effort she was exerting to hold herself together, a kind of internal pressure, like a fist clenching around something fragile. He wanted to say something. He wanted to apologize, to fix it, to offer some reassurance that wasn't empty. What he said was, "I'm sorry." She looked at him. The red of her eyes was flat and hard and gave nothing away, but through the bond, he felt the faintest tremor. Not forgiveness, not even close, but an acknowledgement that the apology was real. "This is temporary," Tsunade said firmly. "We're going to find a solution. In the meantime, this stays between the people in this room plus Shizune. No one else knows. Naruto, that means you don't tell Sakura. Kurenai, that means you don't tell your team. My team will notice if I relocate. Tell them it's for a classified assignment. I'll back the cover story." Tsunade stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "First examination tomorrow morning, 7 sharp. Both of you dismissed." They filed out. In the hallway, Shikamaru touched Naruto's shoulder, a brief, grounding contact, and murmured, "I'll start researching the Yuzashio archives." "Don't do anything stupid between now and tomorrow. Define stupid. Anything you'd normally do." He almost smiled. "I'll come by tonight." He left. Naruto and Kurenai stood in the hallway of the Hokage Tower and looked at each other across a distance of 3 feet that felt like 3 miles. "The apartment in my building isn't bad," Naruto offered. "The one below me, it's got a balcony." "I don't care about the balcony." "Right." She turned and walked toward the stairs. He watched her go, feeling the tugging behind his ribs that she'd described, a pull, like gravity with a direction, pointing toward her as she moved away. It didn't hurt, exactly. It ached. A dull, persistent awareness that something he was connected to was getting farther away. He went home. Kurenai packed a bag. She did it efficiently, the way she did everything. A week's worth of clothes, toiletries, 2 books, her personal weapons kit, and a sealed scroll containing her Genjutsu research notes. She moved through her apartment with mechanical precision, selecting items, folding clothes, organizing her bag with the compartmentalized focus of someone who was absolutely not going to think about the implications of what was happening to her, until she was in a controlled environment and could afford to. The apartment felt different. She'd lived here for 6 years, since Asuma, and it had become the geography of her solitude, every room calibrated to a single occupant. The kitchen was stocked for one. The couch held the impression of one body. The bed was centered, not offset, because there was no reason to leave room. She paused in the bedroom, bag on the bed, and pressed her thumb to the base of her ring finger. The warmth was still there. Fainter now than it had been last night, the bond's fluctuations, she supposed, or maybe her own system adjusting to the intrusion, but present. A reminder. A thread connecting her to a boy 3 blocks away who was probably pacing his apartment and feeling terrible. She could feel that. The guilt. It came through the bond like a low hum, a background frequency she was learning to distinguish from her own emotional noise. Naruto's guilt had a texture, hot and restless and sharp-edged, like a creature trying to escape a cage. Nothing like the cold, controlled quality of her own distress. Kurenai sat on the edge of her bed and let herself think. She was 33 years old. Naruto was 17. He was her colleague's student, the village's Jinchuriki, a boy she had watched grow up from a distance with a mix of sympathy and mild exasperation. She had never thought of him romantically. She had never thought of anyone romantically since Asuma, and even that relationship had been more about companionship and shared history than passion. A slow warmth that grew between 2 people who understood each other's silences. The Genjutsu hadn't felt like Asuma. That was the thing she couldn't stop circling, the thought she kept approaching and retreating from like a moth near a flame. The domestic life Naruto's technique had built for her, the kitchen, the child, the evening routine hadn't been a recreation of what she'd lost. It had been something entirely new. The warmth had been different, brighter, more present. The man in that kitchen hadn't been a quiet, steady-burning coal like Asuma. He'd been sunlight. She hated that she'd noticed. She stood, shouldered her bag, and left her apartment. The walk to Naruto's building took 11 minutes. She took the long way, through the market district, because she needed the time and the noise and the reminder that the world was full of people who were not her and not him, and not connected by an ancient seal that pulsed with every heartbeat. The building was a standard shinobi residential block, 6 stories, concrete and timber, balconies overlooking a narrow street. Naruto's unit was on the 4th floor. The empty unit Tsunade had requisitioned was on the 3rd, directly below. Shizune met her at the building's entrance with a key and a look of professional sympathy. "It's been cleaned and furnished. Basic supplies are stocked. If you need anything, I'll manage. Thank you, Shizune." The apartment was small but functional. A bedroom, a kitchen, a living area with a couch and a low table. A bathroom with a shower that actually worked, which Kurenai tested immediately because she'd lived in shinobi housing before and had learned not to trust plumbing on faith. The balcony overlooked the street, and above it, she could see the underside of Naruto's balcony, 6 feet higher. She unpacked. She put her clothes in the closet. She set her books on the bedside table. She arranged her weapons kit in the drawer beside the bed within reach. She made tea using the supplies Shizune had provided and stood at the window drinking it, looking out at Konoha's rooftops and feeling the pull in her chest that told her Naruto was almost directly above her, close. He was close. And the bond, she could feel it now, a faint humming in her chest like the vibration of a tuning fork, was calmer for his proximity. Less strained. The ache she'd felt as she walked away from the Hokage tower had eased to almost nothing, which meant Tsunade was right. Distance made it worse. Proximity made it better. She was going to be living below Naruto Uzumaki for the foreseeable future, bound to him by an ancient seal, and the bond itself was going to reward them for being close and punish them for being apart. Kurenai finished her tea and began her evening stretches. Routine. Structure. Control. These were the pillars she'd built her life on, and they were not going to crumble because a 17-year-old had knocked them crooked. Above her, through the ceiling, she heard footsteps. Pacing. Back and forth, back and forth. She didn't need the bond to interpret that. She could read restlessness in footfalls the way she could read deception in eye movements. He was pacing, feeling terrible, wanting to come downstairs and apologize again and being afraid to. She almost went to the door. Almost. Instead, she finished her stretches, turned off the lights, and went to bed. She dreamed, not the kitchen this time, something different. She was standing on a bridge over a river. The water below was wide and slow, reflecting a sky that couldn't decide if it was sunset or sunrise. The light was golden and horizontal, painting everything in warm amber. The bridge was wooden, old, the kind of structure you'd find in a village that had been building and rebuilding the same crossing for 100 years. Naruto stood at the other end of the bridge. He looked the way he looked in real life, 17, blonde, blue-eyed, the whisker marks on his cheeks catching the light. Not the older version from the kitchen Genjutsu, just him. He was wearing his usual jacket, unzipped, and his hands were in his pockets, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Not guilt this time. Something quieter than that. "I keep ending up here," he said. "In the dreams, this bridge, it's the bond." Kurenai said, and her voice sounded clear and present in a way that dream voices usually didn't. "We're in a shared dream state. Tsunade warned us this would happen." "Yeah." He scuffed his sandal against the bridge planks. "Sorry, you've apologized. I'll keep apologizing until it's enough." She studied him across the length of the bridge, 20 meters of old wood and golden light between them. The river moved beneath, slow and patient. "You can't fix this with apologies," she said. "You know that." "I know." Then what are you going to do? He looked up at her, and the light caught his eyes and turned them into something startling. Not just blue, but incandescent, the color of a clear sky at the moment the sun breaks through. Whatever it takes, he said. I'll go to Yuzashio myself if I have to. I'll find every fragment of every Uzumaki text. I'll figure out how to undo this. I won't stop until you're free of it. She believed him. That was the complicated part. The bond was translating his intent through the dream space, and she could feel the bedrock sincerity of it, the absolute refusal to accept a problem he'd caused as unsolvable. This was the thing about Naruto that everyone who'd ever fought alongside him eventually learned. When he committed to something, the commitment was total, unreasonable, unbreakable. It was, she had to admit, not an unappealing quality. She immediately wished she hadn't thought that. Come here, she said, and wasn't sure why. He walked across the bridge. His footsteps sounded real. The boards creaked under his weight. The river caught the light and threw it back in scattered pieces. He stopped 2 feet from her. Close enough that she could see the fine detail of his face, the scar on his cheek from a mission she didn't know about, the faint dark circles under his eyes from the same sleepless night she'd had. I need you to understand something, she said. What happened in the Genjutsu, the life I experienced in there, it wasn't real. Whatever the bond is doing now, whatever we feel through it, those feelings are artifacts. They're generated by the seal, not by us. When we dissolve this, they'll disappear. He nodded slowly. I know. Do you? He met her eyes. In the golden light, in the dream, standing on a bridge over a slow river, he looked at her without any of his usual defenses, the grin, the bravado, the loudness. And what was underneath was both younger and older than she expected. A boy who had been alone for so long that the taste of connection, even false connection, even connection built on a mistake, was unbearably sweet. I know, he said again, and this time the word carried weight, the kind of weight that meant he understood, but understanding didn't make it easier. She wanted to reach out and touch him. The impulse surprised her with its strength, a physical pull, not from the bond but from something simpler, something human. The desire to comfort a person who was hurting. She didn't touch him. She was his elder, his superior. His accidental bond partner in a situation neither of them had chosen. We should try to wake up, she said. Kurenai-sensei. Don't. The word came out sharper than she intended. Don't call me that here, not in this space, he blinked. What should I call you? She didn't have an answer. Sensei felt wrong in the intimacy of the dream space, but Kurenai felt too familiar, too much like the name the illusory Naruto had used in the kitchen while they washed dishes together. There was no safe option, no form of address that didn't carry weight she didn't want to bear. We should wake up, she repeated. He nodded. The golden light was shifting, the sky darkening, the bridge beginning to lose definition at its edges. The dream was ending on its own. I meant what I said. He told her as the world faded. Whatever it takes, she woke in the dark. The apartment was unfamiliar, the ceiling closer than her own, the street sounds different. For a disorienting moment, she was nowhere, between the dream and the waking, between the bridge and the bed. Then the bond pulsed once, softly, like a hand placed over a heart. He was awake too. Right above her. She could feel him lying in his bed, staring at his ceiling while she stared at hers, both of them navigating the strange geography of a connection that wasn't supposed to exist. She rolled onto her side and pressed her face into the pillow and said one word, very quietly, into the cotton. Damn. Morning came with an agenda. The first examination at the hospital was thorough, clinical, and deeply uncomfortable. Tsunade probed both their chakra systems independently and then together, noting the resonance patterns, the rate of channel development, and the bond's response to proximity changes. She made them stand at varying distances and recorded the effects. She made them turn their backs to each other and noted that the bond's hum decreased in intensity, but didn't stop. She made them sit in separate rooms and recorded the onset of the ache. 7 minutes for Naruto, 9 for Kurenai, which told them the bond was asymmetric, pulling harder on the person who'd cast it. After the examination, they were dismissed with instructions to maintain proximity, keep their journals, and return tomorrow. They walked out of the hospital into a bright morning. The village was fully awake now, bustling with the mundane energy of commerce and training and daily life, and the contrast between the normalcy of Konoha's streets and the quiet catastrophe of their situation was jarring enough that neither of them spoke for a full block. "I need to train," Naruto said finally. "If I don't burn off energy, I'm going to lose my mind." "Then train. Will you? Is it better if you're nearby, for the bond?" she considered. The clinical answer was yes, proximity reduced strain. But the idea of sitting in a training ground watching Naruto Uzumaki punch things while feeling his emotions through a chakra bond was not how she wanted to spend her morning. "I'll be at the training ground on the north side of the residential block," she said. "That should be close enough. If you feel the ache increasing, come find me." He nodded and went. She watched him jog down the street, already shifting into the physical mode that was his natural state, loose-limbed and energetic, and radiating a kind of vital force that she could now feel through the bond as a warm current against her awareness. She turned and walked toward the north training ground, and as the distance between them increased, she felt the bond stretch like elastic, not painful, not yet, but present. A reminder of the tether. The north training ground was a small clearing ringed by trees, mostly used by off-duty jounin for quiet practice. She had the place to herself. She ran through her Genjutsu forms, the meditative kata that sharpened her mental discipline, and then practiced several technique sequences that required intense focus. The work was grounding, familiar, an affirmation that she was still herself, still capable, still the master of her own mind. She was 40 minutes into practice when the bond spiked. It wasn't pain. It was attention. A sudden, sharp focus, like someone shouting her name from across a room. She stumbled in the middle of a hand sign sequence and caught herself against a tree, one hand flat against the bark, the other pressed to her chest where the bond's anchor point flared with warmth. Something was wrong. Not with her, with him. She was moving before she'd made a conscious decision, her body responding to the bond's alarm with a speed that bypassed thought entirely. She covered the distance to the nearest public training ground in under 2 minutes, running across rooftops with the efficiency of a jounin who'd been navigating Konoha's skyline for 20 years. She found Naruto in training ground 12, and he was fine. Physically fine. Standing in the middle of the field, surrounded by the dispersing smoke of what must have been 50 shadow clones, breathing hard but unhurt. He wasn't alone. Sakura stood 10 feet from him, hands on her hips, face red with frustration or anger or both. "Don't just say it's nothing, Naruto. I can tell something is wrong. Your chakra is..." "It's nothing, Sakura, I'm fine. Drop it. You just dispelled 50 clones in a panic because I grabbed your arm. That is not fine." Kurenai stopped at the edge of the training ground, partially concealed by the tree line. Naruto hadn't seen her, but she felt through the bond the moment he registered her presence. A wash of relief and embarrassment, and something more complicated, a layered emotion she didn't have a name for. Sakura had grabbed his arm. The physical contact had triggered a response through the bond, a spike of foreign sensory input that Naruto's system had interpreted as a threat, causing an involuntary defensive reaction. 50 shadow clones, created and dispersed in the time it took to blink. The bond was making him reactive to physical contact from others. That was new. That was concerning. "I'm working on something and it's got my chakra messed up," Naruto was saying, his voice forcibly casual. "Tsunade knows about it. It's being handled." "What kind of something?" "Naruto, your chakra signature feels different. There's something layered on top of it, like a..." Sakura paused, her medical training asserting itself. "Like a secondary resonance. Are you carrying a seal?" Naruto's expression didn't change, but Kurenai felt his alarm through the bond like a cold spike. "It's classified, Sakura." "Since when do you care about classified?" "Since Tsunade told me she'd remove my ability to mold chakra if I messed this up." That landed. Sakura studied him with narrowed green eyes, the analytical gaze of a medic assessing a patient who was lying about their symptoms. Then her expression softened. Are you in danger? No, are you sure? Yeah, it's just complicated. I'll tell you when I can. She didn't like it. That was obvious. But she was also Sakura Haruno, who had learned through years of painful experience that pushing Naruto Uzumaki before he was ready produced nothing useful. She pulled back. Fine, but if you start acting weirder than normal, I'm going to tsunade myself. Fair, she left. Naruto stood alone in the training ground, shoulders dropping as the tension released, and then he turned and looked directly at where Kurenai was standing in the tree line. You can come out, he said. I know you're there. She stepped into the clearing. What happened? Sakura grabbed my arm and my body just reacted, like her touch was wrong. Not dangerous, just, he searched for the word. Unauthorized, like my system flagged it as not the right person touching me. They looked at each other across the training ground, and the implication of that sat between them like a stone in still water. The bond is filtering physical contact, Kurenai said. Her voice was clinical because clinical was all she could afford right now. Accepting input from the bonded partner and rejecting input from others. That's consistent with what Tsunade described, the resonance seal orienting both chakra systems toward each other. Great. So I'm going to freak out every time someone touches me? You'll adapt. Your system will learn to distinguish between bonded and non-bonded contact. She was drawing on theoretical knowledge now, extrapolating from what she knew of sympathetic techniques and chakra networking. But it means the bond is progressing faster than Tsunade estimated. Naruto sat down on the grass, legs stretched out, and tipped his head back to look at the sky. His jacket was torn at the shoulder where a clone had grabbed him during the mass dispel. He looked tired and young and in over his head, and Kurenai felt a complicated surge of emotion that she deliberately did not examine. She sat down across from him, 3 meters of grass between them. The bond hummed contentedly at the proximity, like a cat purring. Tell me about the seal development, she said. How you got here, I want to understand the technique. He looked at her, surprised. Why? Because if we're going to find a way to dissolve this, I need to understand what I'm dealing with, and because, she paused. Because you built something remarkable, Naruto. Stupid, reckless, unforgivable, frankly, but remarkable. The Genjutsu you used on me was unlike anything I've encountered, and I've encountered everything. I want to understand how. Something shifted in his face. The guilt was still there, she could feel it, a constant undercurrent, but beneath it, a flicker of something warmer. Not pride exactly, recognition, the experience of being seen. It started with Iro-senen's notes, he said. He collected Uzumaki texts for years. Most of them were fragments, water-damaged, incomplete, missing pages. But he organized them really well, and Naruto's throat worked. After he died, Tsunade gave me his collection, all of it, boxes and boxes. I didn't look at them for months, couldn't, but when I finally did. He talked, and she listened. He told her about the first time he'd understood an Uzumaki seal formula, really understood it, not just recognized the characters, but grasped the grammar, the logic beneath the brushstrokes. How it had felt like hearing his family's voice for the first time. How he'd realized that Uzumaki Fuinjutsu wasn't a collection of techniques, but a language, a complete system of expression with its own syntax and poetry. He told her about the months of practice, the failed experiments, the ink-stained nights. The moment he'd realized that his massive chakra reserves, always treated as a blunt instrument, were actually the key to a type of sealing that no one else alive could perform, because Uzumaki seals were designed for Uzumaki chakra, dense and vast and self-replenishing. And without that foundation, the formulas were dead characters on dead paper. He told her about the interior world technique, the concept, the ambition, the first successful test on a clone which had produced a shaky, grayscale room that lasted 3 seconds before collapsing. The iterations, the improvements, the increasing stability and detail, the excitement of creation, and then the training exercise. The pride and the anger and the need to be seen as more than what they thought he was. The casting. The immediate realization that something was different this time, that the technique, when directed at a real person with a real chakra system and real emotions and real unmet needs, had found purchase in a way the clones never could. Kurenai listened to all of it. She asked questions, precise, technical, probing questions that made him think harder about his own work than he ever had. She challenged his assumptions, pointed out gaps in his understanding, and occasionally nodded in a way that indicated genuine respect for a particular insight. They sat in the training ground for 2 hours, talking about seals and chakra and the nature of perception. And at some point, the conversation stopped being about the bond and became about the work itself. 2 shinobi with radically different specialties finding unexpected common ground. You built your Genjutsu space using binding architecture because you needed persistence, Kurenai said, tracing a diagram in the dirt with a stick. Traditional Genjutsu achieves persistence through continuous chakra expenditure. The caster maintains the illusion actively. Your approach was different. You wanted the illusion to be self-sustaining, so you used a seal structure that locks itself in place. She shook her head. It's actually brilliant, in theory. In theory. In practice, you used a marriage seal as load-bearing architecture for an experimental Genjutsu and accidentally bonded yourself to a woman 16 years your senior. So the execution needs work. He stared at her. Then he laughed. It burst out of him, sudden and bright, and through the bond she felt the texture of it. Warm and clear and uncomplicated, the first clean emotion she'd felt from him since this started. Pure amusement. She almost smiled. She caught herself, but the almost was enough for both of them to notice. "Stop that," she said. "Stop what? Stop making this feel normal." The laughter faded, but the warmth remained. He looked at her with those blue eyes, sitting in the grass with a torn jacket and dirt-stained hands, and the weight of an impossible situation on his shoulders. And for a moment, he looked nothing like a 17-year-old boy and everything like the man from the kitchen who had walked through the door and said, "I'm home." Kurenai looked away first. "We should get back," she said. "Shikamaru is coming by tonight, and I want to review the seal formulas before he does." "Right. Yeah." They stood. They walked back toward the residential block together, side by side, maintaining the careful arm's-length distance that was becoming their unconscious default. The afternoon was warm. The village moved around them. A few people glanced. A jounin and a teenager walking together wasn't unusual, but something about their body language must have registered, because Kurenai caught more than one speculative look. At the building, they paused outside the entrance. "Tomorrow," Kurenai said. "After the examination, I want to see all of Jiraiya's Uzumaki texts, every fragment. There are a lot of boxes. Then we'd better start early." She went inside and climbed to the 3rd floor and entered her temporary apartment and closed the door behind her and stood in the hallway with her back against it and pressed her hands flat against the wall on either side of her and breathed. Above her, she heard his footsteps. The creak of a door. The muffled thump of him dropping onto his bed. The bond settled into its low, constant hum. 2 hearts, 1 floor apart, beating in a rhythm that was slowly, inexorably synchronizing. Shikamaru arrived at 7 with 2 bags of takeout and a scroll case. "Dinner and research," he said, standing in Naruto's doorway. "I raided the archives. Everything on Uzumaki ceiling they'd let me access, which wasn't much, but it's a start." Naruto let him in. The apartment had been hastily cleaned, scrolls stacked instead of scattered, dishes washed, surfaces wiped, which Shikamaru noted with a raised eyebrow but didn't comment on. They ate on the floor, backs against the couch, the scroll case open between them. Shikamaru had pulled 4 texts from the village archives. A treatise on Uzumaki containment seals, heavily redacted by Anbu. A fragmentary history of Yuzashio's fall. A catalog of known Uzumaki seal types compiled by a Senju researcher 3 decades ago. And a personal journal from a Konoha shinobi who had married into the Uzumaki clan before the village's destruction. It was the journal that caught Naruto's attention. The author was a woman named Akane Senju, who had married an Uzumaki man named Toshiro and lived in Yuzashio for 6 years before its fall. Her journal entries were personal, intimate, and detailed, the observations of an outsider living inside a culture she was constantly trying to understand. "Listen to this," Naruto said, reading aloud. "Toshiro proposed the resonance binding today. He's been building up to it for months. I could tell from the way he kept almost saying something at dinner and then changing the subject. The Uzumaki treat it as the most significant commitment 2 people can make. More than marriage, Toshiro says. Marriage is a social contract. The binding is a spiritual one. He said, 'When we are bound, you will know me as I truly am, and I will know you, and neither of us will ever be alone again.'" Shikamaru stopped eating. "Keep going." I said, "Yes, I'm terrified. I'm also more certain of anything than I've ever been." "Tomorrow we go to the sealing hall. Toshiro's mother will perform the rite. She told me the binding will show you each other. Everything, not just the beautiful things. Are you prepared for that?" I said I was. She looked at me for a long time and said, "No one ever is, but the binding is kind. It shows you gently." Naruto's voice had gone quiet. He could feel, through the sealing and the bond, Kurenai's attention sharpening. She was in her apartment below, probably reading or meditating, but she'd felt the emotional weight of what he was reading, and it had drawn her focus. He kept reading. The rite was beautiful and simple. We sat facing each other. Toshiro's mother painted the seal on our wrists, 1 stroke each, simultaneously, while we held each other's gaze. Then the seal activated and he paused. The next part of the entry was smudged, water damaged, whole sentences lost. Like a door opening inside my chest, I could feel him, not his thoughts, his being, the shape of him, the warmth. It was the most intimate experience of my life, and we were fully clothed in a room with his mother. Shikamaru took the journal gently from Naruto's hands and scanned ahead, reading quickly. His eyes moved across the pages with increasing speed, flipping forward through entries that chronicled Akane's life as a bonded partner, the adjustments, the discoveries, the growing depth of connection. "Here," he said, stopping. 3 months after the binding, she writes, "I asked Toshiro today if a binding could ever be dissolved. He went very quiet. Then he said, 'There is a way. But it has only been done twice in our history, and both times the people who chose it said it was worse than death. Not because the dissolution is painful, because the absence of what was there is unbearable. Imagine losing a sense. Not sight or hearing. Imagine losing your sense of another person's existence. That is what dissolution feels like.'" They sat with that for a moment. "That's not encouraging." Naruto said, "No, but it confirms that a dissolution method existed. Somewhere in the Uzumaki tradition, there was a procedure for undoing a resonance bond. And it was apparently worse than death, for people who had chosen the bond and lived with it for years. You and Kurenai-sensei are at 30% integration after 1 day. The earlier you dissolve it, the less there would be to lose." It was logical. It was sensible. It was exactly the kind of clear-eyed assessment that Shikamaru excelled at. So Naruto couldn't explain why it made something in his chest tighten. They spent the next 2 hours going through the remaining texts. The Senju researchers' catalog listed 17 distinct types of Uzumaki seals, of which the resonance binding was classified as Type 16, relational/permanent. The entry was brief and clinical, used to formalize spiritual bonds between partners, requires mutual Uzumaki-grade chakra density, considered irreversible under normal circumstances. See also, Yuzashio sealing hall records, destroyed. See also, destroyed, Naruto muttered. "Great. The ruins still exist," Shikamaru said. "The island is abandoned, but expeditions have recovered materials before. If the sealing hall had records on dissolution, they might have survived in sealed chambers or protected vaults. The Uzumaki were masters of preservation seals. They knew how to make things last." Tsunade said she won't authorize an expedition based on a hypothesis. Tsunade said she won't authorize one yet. Give her a week of observation data showing the bond's progression, and the hypothesis becomes a necessity. Shikamaru began rolling up the scrolls and replacing them in the case. In the meantime, we have a bigger problem. Bigger than an accidental marriage seal? Different. The village archives don't have everything. The texts I pulled today were from the general collection, but there's a restricted section, S-rank classified materials, that I don't have access to. If there are additional Uzumaki texts in the village, that's where they'd be. So ask Tsunade for access. I did. She's working on it, but restricted archives access requires approval from the Hokage and the Advisory Council. Shikamaru paused, and the pause had a weight to it that made Naruto look up. The Advisory Council includes Danzo Shimura. The name landed differently than it used to. A year ago, Naruto would have shrugged at it. Danzo was a name adults said with careful voices, a political figure he was vaguely aware of, but didn't concern himself with. Now, after everything, after Jiraiya's death and the truths that had surfaced around it, after learning more about the village shadows, the name carried threat. Danzo, Naruto said flatly. If Tsunade requests restricted access related to Uzumaki sealing techniques, Danzo will know. He'll want to know why. And if he finds out that the village's Jinchuriki has accidentally activated an Uzumaki resonance bond. Shikamaru trailed off, trusting Naruto to follow the thread. Naruto followed it. Danzo, who collected weapons. Danzo, who stockpiled techniques and bloodline limits and human assets in the name of Konoha's security. Danzo, who had been reaching for the Jinchuriki since long before Naruto knew what a Jinchuriki was. An Uzumaki resonance bond, a technique that could link two people at the deepest level, creating shared awareness and tactical coordination, was exactly the kind of tool Danzo would want to understand and replicate. He can't know, Naruto said. He's going to find out eventually. He has root operatives embedded throughout the village infrastructure, including, almost certainly, the hospital. The moment Tsunade filed medical examination records on both you and Kurenai, there was a risk. Tsunade wouldn't. Tsunade is careful, but Danzo is patient. And he has decades of practice at extracting information from systems designed to exclude him. Shikamaru shouldered the scroll case. I'm not saying panic, I'm saying be aware. Whatever we do about the bond, we need to do it faster than Danzo can figure out what's happening. He left. Naruto sat alone in his apartment, the empty takeout containers on the floor, the weight of the conversation settling on him like snowfall, quiet and cumulative and cold. He could feel Kurenai below. She was awake, restless. He could tell because the bond's texture had shifted, taking on the sharp, bright quality that he was learning to associate with her active concentration. She was thinking, working through something. He could feel the motion of her mind without knowing its content, like feeling a machine run through a wall, a knock. On his floor, not his door, 3 sharp raps from below reverberating through the boards, he crossed to the spot and knelt. Yeah, I heard everything. Her voice came up through the floor, muffled but clear. The bond carried the intent behind the words even where the sound blurred them. Come down, we need to talk. He went downstairs. Her apartment was already more organized than his would ever be. Books aligned on the shelf, bags stowed neatly in the closet, tea set arranged on the counter with the precision of a woman who imposed order on chaos as a survival strategy. She opened the door before he knocked. Sit. She said, gesturing to the low table. He sat. She poured tea 2 cups, automatic as if she'd been making tea for 2 people for years, and sat across from him. Danzo, she said. Yeah, he's not going to wait for official channels. If he suspects something involving the Jinchuriki and an unknown Uzumaki technique, he'll investigate independently. Root agents, surveillance, possibly direct approach. What kind of direct approach? Depends on what he thinks the bond can do. At minimum, he'll want intelligence. At maximum. She sipped her tea, and the gesture was so controlled, so precise, that Naruto understood it was a form of self-regulation, a ritual to maintain calm. At maximum, he'll want to replicate it. a technique that creates perfect tactical coordination between two shinobi. That's worth more to a man like Danzo than any weapon. He can't replicate it. It requires Uzumaki chakra density. He doesn't know that yet, and even when he finds out, he'll just shift focus to controlling the source. Her red eyes met his. You, the last Uzumaki. The tea was good. Naruto didn't usually drink tea. He was a ramen and milk person, but something about the way Kurenai made it, the attention and the ritual, made it taste like it mattered. So what do we do? He asked. We accelerate. Shikamaru is right. Whatever we're going to do about the bond, we need to do it before Danzo gets involved. Which means I need to see Jiraiya's texts immediately, not tomorrow. Which means, she looked at the clock on the wall, 9:30 at night. Which means tonight. Naruto blinked. You want to go through Irosenin's collection tonight? I want to start. How many boxes? 7, maybe 8. Then we'd better not waste time. He went upstairs and came back with 2 boxes, then 2 more than the rest. Kurenai cleared the low table and the floor, and they spread the fragments out, water-damaged scrolls, torn pages, partial seal formulas, hand-copied translations of Uzumaki originals, Jiraiya's annotations in his loose, energetic handwriting. They worked. Side by side at first, then across from each other as the piles grew and they needed more space. The bond hummed between them, warm and steady, and Naruto noticed that the closer they were physically and the more aligned their focus, the calmer it became. Like a restless child soothed by the presence of both parents. He wished he hadn't thought of it that way. Kurenai rayed with ferocious speed, her Genjutsu-trained mind absorbing and categorizing information with an efficiency that put his own reading speed to shame. Every few minutes, she'd pull a fragment aside and set it in a growing stack, pieces she'd identified as potentially relevant. Here, she said an hour in, holding up a torn page. This is a partial description of the resonance bond's activation sequence. It references a key phrase spoken during the rite. To Shiro, the man from the journal, his wife mentioned that his mother performed the rite. There was a verbal component. I didn't say any key phrase. No, which means the bond activated through an alternate pathway. The emotional intensity of the Genjutsu, maybe, combined with the seal architecture. A back door. She set the page down and picked up another fragment. The Uzumaki built redundancy into their seals. If the formal activation was unavailable, the seal might activate through sufficient emotional resonance alone. You're saying my feelings activated it. I'm saying the seal was designed to respond to genuine emotional connection between two people. The formal rite used a key phrase as a trigger. Without the key phrase, the seal found another trigger, the emotional experience you created inside the Genjutsu, the domesticity, the love, the child. She said the child without inflection, but Naruto felt the flinch through the bond. A sharp, bright pain, there and gone, like a match struck and immediately extinguished. He didn't mention it. Some things you felt through a bond and kept to yourself. They worked until midnight. Then 1, then 2. The stacks of relevant fragments grew. Kurenai organized them into categories. Activation mechanics, bond characteristics, historical accounts, and, the thinnest pile, dissolution references. There were only 3 fragments in the last category, all of them incomplete. The first was a single sentence from what appeared to be an instructional text. The dissolution of a resonance bond requires the willing participation of both bonded individuals and access to the sealing hall's central array. The second was a damaged passage that read, "Must enter the bond space together," and, followed by a water stain that obliterated 3 lines then. "Choose separation with full knowledge of," and another gap then. "The seal recognizes intent." The third was Jiraiya's handwriting. A note in the margin of a completely unrelated text about explosive tags, scrawled as if he'd been thinking out loud. Uzumaki resonance dissolution. Kei says it requires the truth of the heart. Both partners must be honest about what they want. The seal can't be tricked. Ask T about this when sober. K and T, Naruto said. Kushina and, who's T? Tsunade, probably. He would have discussed Uzumaki sealing with her. Kurenai held the note up to the light. The truth of the heart. Both partners must be honest about what they want. That's consistent with the other fragments. The dissolution requires willing participation, access to the sealing hall, and emotional honesty. The sealing hall is in Yuzashio, which means we need that expedition. And emotional honesty means we need to both genuinely want the bond dissolved. Not just rationally, genuinely, the seal recognizes intent. They sat with that. Outside, the village was dark and quiet, the deep stillness of a sleeping city. Inside, the lamplight was warm, and the fragments of a dead clan's wisdom were spread across the floor between two people who were connected by the remnants of that clan's most sacred rite. "Do you?" Naruto asked. Kurenai looked at him. "Do you genuinely want it dissolved?" He clarified. His voice was steady, but the bond betrayed him. She could feel the tremor underneath, the fear of the answer and the fear of not asking. "It's been 2 days," she said. "I know. We didn't choose this. I know. I'm 33, you're 17. I know. Then you know the answer." "I want to hear you say it." She met his eyes. The lamplight caught the red of her irises and turned them into something molten, something that held heat. "Yes," she said. "I want it dissolved." The bond registered the truth of the statement. Kurenai felt it confirm, a small settling, like a lock clicking into place. She meant it. She genuinely wanted the bond dissolved. But beneath the truth, in the space the bond couldn't quite reach, in the marrow of her where the most private things lived, a smaller voice said, "Then why did the Genjutsu life feel like coming home?" She didn't say that out loud. "Okay," Naruto said. "Then we go to Yuzashio. We find the sealing hall, we dissolve it. We convinced Tsunade to authorize the expedition first. I'll convince her." "How?" He grinned, and it was the first real grin she'd seen from him since the training exercise, bright and reckless, and carrying the particular Naruto Uzumaki energy that bent the world around it through sheer, stubborn force. "I'll be very annoying until she says yes." Kurenai looked at him. This ridiculous boy. This accidental husband. This lonely, brilliant, infuriating person who had reached into the ruins of his own heritage and pulled out something beautiful and devastating and aimed it at her because she'd hurt his pride. "Go to bed, Naruto," she said. He stood. He collected his boxes. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "the life in the Genjutsu, the kitchen, Mikoto." He swallowed. "I know it wasn't real, but if it had been, it would have been a good life." He left before she could respond. Kurenai sat alone in her temporary apartment with fragments of a dead clan's language spread across the floor and a bond humming in her chest and the ghost of a ring on her finger. She pressed her thumb to the base of that finger. The warmth pulsed, steady, patient, above her footsteps. The creak of a bed. Silence. She cleaned up the fragments, stacked them neatly, turned off the lamp. Got into bed. Lay in the dark, feeling the bond settle into its nighttime rhythm, slow, warm, deep, like a shared breath. The phantom warmth came again. The shape of someone beside her who wasn't there. This time, she didn't fight it. She lay still and let it be what it was, an echo of something that didn't exist, generated by a seal she hadn't chosen, connecting her to a person she hadn't chosen. And felt, beneath the fear and the anger and the clinical determination to dissolve the bond and get her life back, a thin, bright thread of something she refused to name. She slept. The dream came. The bridge, the river, the golden light, Naruto standing on the other side. This time, she was the one who walked across. Chapter 3. The binding Tsunade's office smelled like old paper and cold tea, which meant she'd been working through the night. When Naruto and Kurenai arrived at 7 for their second examination, the Hokage was standing at the window with her back to the room, watching the village wake up with the particular stillness of someone carrying a decision they hadn't yet spoken aloud. "Close the door," she said without turning. Shizune closed it. The examination table was already set up, diagnostic seals arranged in a careful grid across its surface, but Tsunade didn't move toward it. She stayed at the window for another 10 seconds, then turned and looked at them with an expression that Naruto had learned to associate with very bad news delivered with absolute clarity. I spoke with the advisory council this morning. Naruto felt Kurenai go rigid beside him. Not physically, she didn't move, but through the bond, her entire emotional landscape locked down, walls slamming into place with a speed and precision that spoke of decades of practice. He felt the shape of her alarm and then felt it disappear behind fortifications. "About us?" Kurenai asked. "About restricted archives access. I framed it as a research request related to Jinchuriki chakra stability, technically true since the bond is affecting Naruto's system. I didn't mention you specifically." Tsunade moved to her desk and sat. Hamura and Koharu approved the request without issue. Danzo abstained from the vote. Shikamaru, who had arrived before them and was sitting in his usual corner chair, looked up from the scroll he'd been reading. "Abstained?" He said he had insufficient context to make an informed decision and would reserve judgment pending further information. Tsunade's mouth was a thin line, which means he already knows something and is buying time to learn more. "How much could he know?" Naruto asked. "That depends on where his people are." Tsunade opened a drawer and pulled out a file. "I had Shizune review the hospital's security logs. Someone accessed the diagnostic records from yesterday's examination. The access was authorized, it came from a valid medical clearance code, but the code belongs to a nurse who was off duty at the time." "Root," Kurenai said. "Almost certainly, they have Naruto's examination data. Chakra readings, resonance patterns, the presence of a secondary signature in his system. They don't have yours. Your records are filed under a separate protocol, but it won't take long for someone competent to identify a secondary signature and start narrowing possibilities." The room was quiet. Morning light fell across Tsunade's desk, illuminating dust motes and casting sharp shadows from the stacks of paperwork that never seemed to diminish. "How long?" Shikamaru asked, "if Danzo assigns his best analyst?" 3 days, maybe 4. Root's intelligence apparatus is thorough, but not instantaneous. They'll need to cross-reference the secondary chakra signature against known profiles, which means sampling or surveillance. If we're careful about where and when Kurenai interacts with Naruto, we can't be careful about that." Kurenai interrupted. "The bond requires proximity. We're already living in the same building. If Root is conducting surveillance, that proximity is visible." Tsunade nodded slowly. "Which is why I'm making a decision I don't love." She opened the file. Inside were mission assignment forms, standard A-rank paperwork, the kind Naruto had seen 100 times. "I'm authorizing the Yuzashio expedition, effective immediately." Naruto blinked. Shikamaru sat forward. Kurenai's emotional walls dropped for a fraction of a second, and through the bond, Naruto caught a flash of something complex, relief and trepidation braided together so tightly they were almost indistinguishable. The cover story is a historical research mission. Recovery of cultural artifacts from the ruins of Yuzashio, authorized by the Hokage's office as part of an ongoing archival project. That's the official record. The real objective is to locate the Uzumaki Sealing Hall and find dissolution records for the resonance bond. Team composition. Shikamaru asked, already in operational mode. Small, 4 people. Naruto, Kurenai, you, and 1 combat specialist. Tsunade looked at each of them in turn. Normally, I'd send an Anbu escort for anything involving the Jinchuriki outside village walls, but Anbu channels are compromised. Danzo has too much access, so we keep it tight. Shikamaru, your team lead for tactical and research. Kurenai, your operational command. Naruto is the SEAL specialist. "And the 4th?" Kurenai asked. "I'm assigning Yamato. He's discreet, he's capable, and his wood release gives you both a combat edge and a field containment option if the bond destabilizes during the journey." Naruto nodded. Yamato, Captain Yamato, Tenzo, whatever he was calling himself this month, was solid. Quiet, professional, and one of the few people Naruto trusted completely in the field. He was also one of the few people who understood what it meant to carry something in your body that you hadn't chosen. Timeline, Shikamaru asked. You leave tomorrow morning, dawn. The journey to Whirlpool Country takes 4 days by standard route, but I want you taking the northern approach through the land of hot springs to avoid the main trade roads. 6 days, maybe 7. You'll have 2 weeks total for the mission. After that, I'll need you back regardless of outcome because I can only keep Danzo in the dark for so long. 2 weeks, Kurenai repeated. That's not much time to search an entire ruined village. No, which is why you're going to narrow the search before you leave. Tsunade pulled a second item from the drawer, a scroll case, old and scarred, sealed with a preservation formula that glowed faintly green. This arrived from my personal vault this morning. It's Jiraiya's field notes from his only visit to Yuzashio 12 years ago. He mapped portions of the ruin, including what he believed to be the approach route to the sealing hall. He never entered it. The entrance was protected by security seals he couldn't bypass, but in Uzumaki might have better luck. She held the scroll case out. Naruto took it, and the preservation seal warmed under his touch, responding to his chakra with a familiarity that made his throat tight. Jiraiya had sealed this. Jiraiya's hands had held this case and drawn these formulas and walked those ruins, thinking of a student he didn't yet have and a clan he couldn't save. Thank you, Ba-chan, Naruto said quietly. Tsunade's expression softened for exactly 1 second. Then it was business again. Examination first. Then preparation. You leave at dawn. She stood and moved to the diagnostic table. Kurenai, you're first. The examination was faster this time. Tsunade knew what she was looking for and went directly to the bond's anchor points. The results confirmed what they'd already suspected. The bond had progressed overnight. 35% integration, up from 30. The microchannels were deepening, and new lateral connections were forming between the primary channels and their secondary chakra pathways. The rate isn't linear, Tsunade said, making notes. It's accelerating. The bond builds on itself. Each new connection facilitates more connections. At this rate, you'll hit 50% within a week. What happens at 50? Naruto asked. Based on the historical accounts, qualitative shift. Emotional bleed becomes emotional sharing. Not just sensing the other person's feelings, but understanding them in context. Proximity awareness becomes directional. You'll know not just that the other person exists, but exactly where they are, how far, what direction. And the shared dreams will start happening during waking hours. Waking dreams? Kurenai said sharply. Brief episodes. Moments where the bond space overlaps with waking perception. You might see the bridge, or whatever shared dreamscape you've established, superimposed on real surroundings for a few seconds. It's not dangerous at that stage, but it is disorienting. Disorienting in the middle of a mission through hostile territory, Shikamaru said flatly. That's a problem. Which is why I'm sending you. Your job is to keep them functional in the field while they deal with the bond's progression. Watch for episodes. Maintain tactical awareness when theirs is compromised. Be their external brain when their internal ones are occupied. Shikamaru sighed the sigh of a man who had foreseen this exact burden and walked into it anyway. Troublesome. Dismissed. All of you, prepare for departure. Naruto spent the rest of the day packing and failing to pack. The problem wasn't the gear. He could assemble a field kit in 12 minutes. A skill drilled into him by Kakashi and Jiraiya, and every mission he'd run since he was 12. The problem was the scroll. Jiraiya's field notes. He'd unrolled it on his kitchen table and had been staring at it for an hour. The map was beautiful. Jiraiya's handwriting was loose and confident, and his cartographic skills were better than Naruto would have expected from a man who spent most of his research time at bathhouses. The ruins of Yuzashio were rendered in careful detail. The coastline of the island, the tidal flats, the outer walls, breached in 3 places, marked with Jiraiya's annotations. Structural collapse, blast damage, deliberate demolition. The grid of streets and buildings that made up the ghost of a city. The sealing hall was marked near the center of the village. In a district Jiraiya had labeled the Spiral Quarter, the oldest part of Yuzashio, built around the original Uzumaki settlement. His notes described it as heavily warded, with security seals that were still active decades after the village's destruction. Tried 3 approaches to the sealing hall entrance, Jiraiya had written. All blocked by barrier seals I can't crack. My sealing knowledge is good, but these are Uzumaki grade. They require clan chakra or the specific key formulas, neither of which I have. Future reference: bring Naruto when he's old enough. His blood might open what my skill can't. Naruto pressed his fingers to the page where Jiraiya had written his name. The ink was 12 years old. Jiraiya had been thinking of him 12 years ago, planning for him, leaving breadcrumbs for a future he hadn't lived to see. A knock at the door. Not the polite kind, 3 sharp raps that carried authority. He opened it. Kurenai stood in the hallway with a pack slung over one shoulder and a stack of sealed scrolls under her arm. Preparation meeting, she said. My apartment, bring the map. I was going to, now, Naruto. He grabbed the scroll case and followed her downstairs. Her apartment had been transformed. The low table was cleared and covered with a clean cloth, and she'd pinned a large-scale map of the Land of Fire's northern territories to the wall. Her pack was already assembled by the door, compact, efficient, organized with the pathological neatness that he was learning was her default state. Sit, she said, and started spreading the sealed scrolls across the table. These are the fragments from last night's review that I categorized as relevant to the sealing hall. 14 partial texts. I've organized them by probable relevance. The first stack deals with the hall's layout and function, the second with the resonance bond right itself. The third. She tapped the smallest stack. Dissolution. He sat across from her and unrolled Jiraiya's map between them. Their hands were inches apart on the paper. He could feel the bond responding to the proximity, a deepening warmth, a sense of alignment like 2 instruments coming into tune. The northern approach through Hot Springs country adds 2 days to the journey, Kurenai said, tracing the route on the wall map. Standard route through the Land of Fire's eastern coast would be faster, but the trade roads pass through 3 population centers and a border checkpoint. 2 visible. Shikamaru will optimize the route. That's what he does. I want to have options before he does. I don't like depending on a single plan. She turned from the wall map to Jiraiya's scroll. Show me the sealing hall, he pointed. She leaned close, studying Jiraiya's annotations, and her hair fell forward across her shoulder. She smelled like green tea and something floral that he couldn't identify. Through the bond, he felt her concentration, sharp, focused, consuming, and beneath it, a current of something quieter. Not anxiety. Anticipation. The part of her that was a shinobi, a professional, responding to the prospect of a mission with the instinctive readiness of someone who had been doing this for 20 years. She was good at this. He could feel it. Not just observe it, but feel it. The bone-deep competence, the way her mind organized information and identified priorities and mapped contingencies without apparent effort. The bond was showing him something that casual observation never could, the interior architecture of a master at work. The security seals on the hall, she said, still studying the map. Jiraiya couldn't bypass them. You think you can? Maybe. He said they need clan chakra. I've got that. Clan chakra might not be enough. The Uzumaki designed their security for a clan-scale population. Individual chakra signatures would have been cataloged. Yours isn't in any catalog. You were born after the fall. But the seals might recognize Uzumaki-type chakra even without a specific signature. Like a key that opens any lock in a building, not just one door. Or they might interpret an unregistered signature as an intruder and respond accordingly. She looked up from the map. We need to be prepared for the possibility that the sealing hall is a trap for anyone who enters it without proper authorization. Then we figure out authorization. How? He pulled one of the scrolls from her second stack, the resonance bond materials, and unrolled it. This fragment describes the activation rite, the key phrase spoken during the ceremony. If there's a key phrase for activation, there might be one for entry. a passphrase that the Uzumaki used to access the sealing hall. That's a guess. It's a hypothesis. Since when do you use words like hypothesis? He grinned. Shikamaru's rubbing off on me. Kurenai almost smiled again. He was keeping count now. 2 almost smiles in 2 days. They worked through the afternoon. The preparation was thorough: route planning, supply lists, contingency scenarios, communication protocols. Kurenai ran the session with the natural authority of a jounin who had led teams for years. And Naruto found himself responding to it, falling into the rhythm of her command style with a comfort that surprised him. At one point, she was explaining her preferred formation for travel through forested terrain: staggered line, 20-meter intervals, point rotation every 2 hours, and she reached across the table to adjust his hand position on a tactical diagram. Her fingers touched the back of his hand. The bond sang, not a pulse, not a hum. A clear, bright note, like a bell struck in a silent room, resonating through both of them simultaneously. Naruto felt it cascade through his chakra system, a rush of warmth that started at the point of contact and radiated outward, filling his chest, his arms, his throat. His perception sharpened. The room became more vivid, colors brighter, sounds clearer. Kurenai's chakra signature, which he'd been feeling as a background presence since the bond formed, suddenly leapt into focus. Complex and layered and beautiful, deep reds and cool blues threaded through with silver. Kurenai snatched her hand back. She was breathing hard. Her red eyes were wide and her pupils were dilated, and through the bond, Naruto felt her reaction. The same cascade, the same sharpening, the same sudden, terrifying vividness, overlaid with a frantic attempt to suppress it, to slam the walls back up, to regain control. They stared at each other across the table. "That's new," Naruto said. "Don't touch me," Kurenai said, and her voice was steady, but the bond told him everything her voice wouldn't. She'd felt it too. The clarity. The connection. The way their chakra systems had reached for each other through the point of physical contact and harmonized in a single sustained note that felt like, there was no other word for it, rightness. "I won't," he said. "I'm sorry. It's not your fault. The bond is." She pressed her hands flat on the table, grounding herself. "Physical contact accelerates the resonance. Tsunade should have warned us." "She might not have known. She's working from fragments too." Kurenai nodded tightly. She stood and walked to the kitchen and poured water and drank it in 3 long swallows, her back to him. He watched her shoulders, tight, controlled, the muscles in her neck corded with effort. He wanted to touch her again. Not for any reason he could justify. Not romantically, not strategically. Just because the bond had shown him, in that single moment of contact, what it would feel like when 2 people were truly connected. And the absence of it now was like stepping from sunlight into shade. He understood for the first time why Akane Senju's journal had described the dissolution as worse than death. If a full resonance bond felt like what he'd just felt, multiplied by 100, sustained for years, then losing it would be like losing a limb. Like losing a sense. Like losing the part of your awareness that told you someone in the world knew you completely and was glad you existed. He stayed on his side of the table. He kept his hands to himself. Kurenai returned, composed, professional, every wall rebuilt. "We continue," she said. "No more physical contact until we understand the bond's response parameters." Agreed. They worked until evening, maintaining the careful distance, a space between them that was both discipline and denial. When Shikamaru arrived at 6 to finalize the route planning, he took one look at them, sitting on opposite sides of the table with the rigid posture of people maintaining a perimeter, and said nothing, which was louder than anything he could have said. "Northern route, as directed," Shikamaru said, spreading his own map over Kurenai's. 6.5 days to the coast of Whirlpool Country. I've identified 3 safe houses along the route, 2 Konoha assets and 1 independent, a contact of Jiraiya's who Tsunade vouched for. We'll travel light and fast. I want to be on the island within 7 days of departure. "Yamato?" Kurenai asked, briefed and ready, He'll meet us at the north gate at dawn. He wasn't told details, just that it's a research expedition with security concerns. He's professional enough not to ask questions until we're in the field. He'll notice the bond, Naruto said. He'll notice something. We tell him what he needs to know to function as a team member. The resonance bond, the proximity requirement, the potential for episodes. We don't tell him about the marriage component unless it becomes tactically relevant. Shikamaru paused, looking between them, and it should not become tactically relevant. It won't, Kurenai said firmly. They finalized the plan. Shikamaru left. Naruto gathered his materials and stood by the door, and the moment of departure stretched into something weighted and awkward. Two people who would be spending the next 2 weeks in constant proximity trying to figure out how to say goodnight. Get some sleep, Kurenai said. Dawn comes early. You too. He went upstairs. He finished packing. He checked his gear twice, set out his clothes for tomorrow, and brushed his teeth. He stood at the bathroom mirror and looked at himself and tried to reconcile the person he saw. A 17-year-old with messy blonde hair and toothpaste on his chin, with the person the bond was making him feel like. Someone connected. Someone part of something. He went to bed. The phantom warmth came immediately, the shape of someone beside him, pressed close. He was getting used to it, which was both comforting and alarming. The dream found him quickly, the bridge again. But this time, Kurenai was already in the middle of it, sitting on the railing with her legs dangling over the water, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different in the dream space, softer, less armored, more like a woman and less like a jounin. The perpetual alertness that characterized her waking presence was muted here, as if the bond space was a place where her defenses weren't needed. You're early, she said, or you're late. He walked to the railing and leaned against it beside her, careful not to touch. Tomorrow we leave. Yes. The river below was slow and dark, reflecting stars that didn't belong to any real sky. The bridge swayed slightly in a wind that came from nowhere. I've been thinking about the touch, Kurenai said, and she sounded different, honest in a way that the waking version of her would never permit. The dream space stripped pretenses. When our hands touched, what it felt like. Yeah. It was the clearest I've ever felt another person's chakra, and I've been feeling chakra my entire career. I'm a sensor type. I read people's energy the way most people read facial expressions. She looked at the water. When I touched you, I didn't just sense your chakra, I understood it, the shape of your loneliness, the texture of your determination. She stopped herself. The what? She was quiet for a long time, the stars reflected in the water. The way you see me. She said finally. Through the bond, when we touched, I felt how you see me, not how you think about me or what you believe about me, how you see me, the actual perceptual experience. Naruto's mouth went dry. What did it look like? Like light through stained glass, complex, beautiful, refracted. She still wasn't looking at him. No one has ever seen me that way. Asuma loved me, but he saw me as a companion. My students see me as a teacher. The village sees me as a tool. You see me as... She searched for the word. A person, Naruto said. More than that. You see me as a person who is also a mystery, something to be understood, not just known. She turned her head toward him, and her red eyes in the dreamlight were luminous. That's dangerous, Naruto, for both of us. I know. Do you? Because we're about to spend 2 weeks traveling together, sleeping in close proximity, with a bond that rewards physical contact and punishes distance, and your perception of me is... She cut herself off with a sharp breath. I'm 33. You keep saying that, because it matters. It matters to the village. It matters to protocol. Does it matter to you? She stared at him. In the dream space, without her walls, her face was an open book, surprise and indignation, and beneath both of those, like a river under ice, the faintest glimmer of something that could not yet be named. Go to sleep, Naruto. We're already asleep. Then wake up. He woke up. The apartment was dark. The seal on his wrist pulsed once, warm, and went still. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, feeling the afterimage of Kurenai's expression, the surprise, the indignation, the glimmer, and thought. I am in so much trouble. Dawn came gray and cold, a thin mist hanging over the village like a held breath. The north gate was quiet at this hour. 2 Chunin guards stood their watch with the drowsy vigilance of the early shift, and a single merchant cart was queued for departure, its driver dozing in the seat. The tree line beyond the gate was dark, the forest a wall of shadow waiting to be entered. Yamato was already there. He stood by the gate in full tactical gear, his pack adjusted with military precision, his expression the particular blend of calm and readiness that characterized career Anbu. He nodded when he saw them approach. Kurenai-san, Naruto, Shikamaru. He studied the group with quick, professional eyes. Light team for an expedition into Whirlpool Country. Speed over size, Shikamaru said. We'll brief on the move, ready? Always. They passed through the gate. The guards logged them out. A research team, A-rank authorization, expected return in 2 weeks. And then they were in the forest, the village falling away behind them, the canopy closing overhead. Naruto fell into travel formation without thinking. Point position, 10 meters ahead of the group, his senses extended to their limit. The forest was alive around them. Birds, insects, the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. And the familiar rhythm of movement through trees settled his nerves in a way that no amount of sitting and planning could. Behind him, in the formation center, Kurenai moved with the efficient silence of a career field operative. He could feel her through the bond, a steady, focused presence, alert but not anxious. The travel pace seemed to soothe the bond the same way it soothed him. The shared activity, the common direction, the physical proximity maintained by formation spacing, all of it fed the resonance a diet of cooperation that kept it calm. They traveled for 3 hours before the first rest stop. A clearing by a stream, sheltered by rock formations. Shikamaru called the halt and they dropped packs and settled into the automatic routine of a field break, water, rations, perimeter check. Yamato took the perimeter. When he was out of earshot, Shikamaru looked at Naruto and Kurenai. We need to brief him, soon. I know, Kurenai said. Tonight at the first camp, I'd rather do it when we're settled and secure. Agreed. Shikamaru pulled out his field journal. Bond status, stable, Naruto said. Better than yesterday, actually. The travel seems to help. Shared activity and common purpose, Kurenai confirmed. The bond responds to alignment. When we're working toward the same goal, the resonance is smoother. Shikamaru noted this. What about the contact issue? They glanced at each other. No incidents, Kurenai said. We're maintaining distance. Yamato returned from the perimeter sweep. Clear, no sign of surveillance. Good, Shikamaru said. Let's move. They traveled until dusk, covering ground at a pace that reflected the urgency no one was explicitly acknowledging. The forest thinned as they moved north, deciduous giving way to pine, the air cooling as elevation increased. By the time Shikamaru called camp, they were deep in the hills that marked the border between the land of fire and the land of hot springs. Camp was established with practiced efficiency. Yamato used his wood release to create a basic shelter. Nothing elaborate, just a raised platform with a partial roof to keep off the dew. Shikamaru set up the cooking gear. Naruto scouted a radius and set proximity alarms, standard explosive tags modified with sensor seals. Another of his innovations that no one had asked about but everyone had quietly adopted. They ate around a small, smokeless fire. Rice and dried fish, and the foil-wrapped onigiri that Shizune had packed for them. The food was functional rather than enjoyable, but field rations were never about pleasure. Yamato ate steadily and watched them with the patient observation of a man who had spent years in Anbu and knew how to read a team's dynamics from 100 small cues. He'd said nothing about the bond. Hadn't asked about the mission's real purpose. Hadn't commented on the way Naruto and Kurenai moved around each other, always aware, always at the same distance, like 2 magnets held at arm's length. But he was watching. After the meal, Shikamaru gave Kurenai a look. She set down her cup. Yamato, she said. There's something you need to know about this mission. She told him. Not everything, not the domestic Genjutsu, not the kitchen, not Makoto, not the phantom warmth in bed at night. but the essential facts. The resonance bond, its accidental activation, its progressive nature, the symptoms, the medical assessment, the need for dissolution, the sealing hall. Yamato listened without interruption. His expression didn't change. When Kurenai finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "And Uzumaki resonance bond," he said. "Between you and Naruto?" "Yes," progressing toward full integration. "Yes, and we're going to the ruins of Yuzashio to find a way to dissolve it before it becomes permanent." "Yes." Another pause, then Yamato looked at Naruto. "You built this technique yourself, the seal-based Genjutsu?" "Yeah, and you used a binding seal as the foundation because you needed structural persistence." "Yeah." Yamato nodded slowly, and Naruto saw something in his eyes that he hadn't expected, not judgment, not alarm, but a kind of rueful recognition. The look of a man who understood what it meant to carry something in your body that changed the rules. "When I was young," Yamato said, Orochimaru would release cells in my body without my consent. I spent years learning to live with something I didn't choose. The ability became mine eventually. I use it. I control it. It's part of who I am. But I remember what it felt like at the beginning. The sense that your own body wasn't entirely yours anymore. Kurenai's jaw tightened. Through the bond, Naruto felt her react to Yamato's words, a sharp, complicated emotion. Empathy, recognition, the solidarity of shared experience. "Thank you," she said quietly. "What do you need from me?" Yamato asked. "Combat support, containment capability if the bond destabilizes, and," Kurenai hesitated. "Observation. You have the most objective perspective on this team. If you see us behaving in ways that suggest the bond is compromising our judgment, I need you to say so. Directly. Don't be diplomatic." "Understood." Yamato looked between them. "For what it's worth, I've seen stranger things in this village. An accidental marriage seal barely cracks the top 10. Naruto snorted. Kurenai didn't quite smile, but some of the tension left her shoulders. They set watches. Yamato took first, Shikamaru second, Kurenai third, Naruto fourth. The arrangement put the bonded pair on adjacent watches, allowing a handoff that wouldn't strain the resonance with too much distance. Naruto lay in his bedroll and stared up at the partial roof of Yamato's shelter and felt the bond settling into its nighttime mode. Slow, deep, warm. Kurenai was 4 meters away in her own bedroll, her back to him. He could feel her awake, her mind still running, processing the day and preparing for tomorrow with the relentless thoroughness that defined her. Slowly, gradually, her awareness softened. The sharp edges of her concentration blurred as sleep approached. He felt it happen the way you feel a room grow dark, not suddenly but by degrees, the light fading and the shadows deepening until the landscape of her consciousness was twilight. She slept. And as she slept, the bond opened wider. It happened without warning. One moment he was lying awake, feeling the normal background hum. The next, the hum swelled into something fuller, richer, a chord instead of a single note. Kurenai's sleeping mind, unguarded by the walls she maintained so fiercely during waking hours, was radiating openly through the bond. He felt her dreams. Not the bridge, not the shared space, but her private dreams, the ones that belonged to her alone. Fragments, images, emotions without narrative, the smell of cigarette smoke, a man's laugh deep and warm, a memorial stone in the rain. Hands on her shoulders, large and rough and gentle. A name she murmured in her sleep that Naruto caught through the bond like a whispered secret. Asuma, the grief hit him like a wave. Not his grief, hers. Years of it, compressed and dense, stored in the deep architecture of her psyche the way sediment stores at the bottom of a lake. She had loved a man and lost him and folded that loss into herself so completely that it had become structural, a part of her foundation, invisible from the outside but bearing weight. Naruto closed his eyes and let it wash over him. He didn't fight it. He didn't try to block it or analyze it. He just felt it, the shape of her sorrow, the weight of her solitude, the fierce, defiant dignity with which she had rebuilt herself around an absence. He understood something then. The Genjutsu life, the kitchen, the ring, the child, hadn't just been his subconscious projecting a fantasy. The seal had reached into both of them and found the places where they were broken and built a world where those breaks were healed. His loneliness. Her grief. Two voids that fit together like puzzle pieces, the shape of what one lacked matching the shape of what the other could provide. The bond hadn't manufactured the connection. It had found it, like a river finding a channel already cut into the earth. Naruto lay in the dark and felt Kurenai's grief, and ached with a sorrow that was not entirely hers and not entirely his, but something in between. Something the bond was creating from the raw material of two people who had been alone for too long. He turned on his side, facing away from her, and pressed his wrist, the seal wrist, against his chest. The bond pulsed, steady, patient, warm. "I'll fix this," he promised silently, to her, to himself. To the ghost of Asuma Sarutobi, whose laugh he could still feel echoing through the bond like smoke. "I'll find a way to set you free." 3 days in, the bond hit 40%. Kurenai felt the shift during the morning travel, a sudden deepening of the resonance, like a pool that had been ankle-deep becoming knee-deep. Naruto, running point ahead of her, stumbled slightly on a branch and caught himself, and she knew before he turned that he'd felt it too. They stopped for a brief check. Kurenai performed a self-assessment while Shikamaru took notes. 40%, she confirmed. "The emotional sharing has increased. I can identify specific emotions now, not just textures." During travel just now, I could tell he was thinking about something that made him simultaneously sad and determined. Naruto, standing 10 feet away, rubbed the back of his neck. "Iro Senin, I was thinking about his notes." Kurenai nodded. "Before today, I would have felt the emotion without context. Now I can feel the flavor. Sadness with love underneath. Determination with grief at the edges. It's becoming specific." Shikamaru wrote this down. 50% was the threshold Tsunade identified for qualitative shifts. "You're accelerating faster than her initial estimate. At this rate, you could hit 50 within 3 days." "The shared activity," Yamato said from his perimeter position. "You mentioned it stabilizes the bond. Could it also be feeding it?" If the bond responds positively to cooperation and alignment, then a mission, constant shared purpose, mutual reliance, close proximity, might be the ideal growth environment. The thought was uncomfortable. They were on a mission to dissolve the bond, and the mission itself was making the bond stronger. "We continue," Kurenai said. "There's no option to slow down. We deal with whatever the bond does as it comes." They continued. The terrain was changing. The hills gave way to a coastal plateau, sparsely forested, with the salt smell of the sea bleeding into the air. They were approaching the land of hot springs, a small neutral country that sat between the land of fire and the coast. The route Shikamaru had planned took them through the country's rural western district, away from the tourist centers and the hidden village of Yuzashio. On the 4th day, they reached the first safe house, a farmstead run by a retired Konoha genin who asked no questions and provided a hot meal and a dry barn to sleep in. Naruto ate 3 helpings of stew and fell asleep in the hay with the deep, instant unconsciousness of a field operative banking rest against future need. The dream came differently this time. No bridge. No river. No golden light. He was in the kitchen. Not the Genjutsu kitchen, a different one. Simpler, rougher. A stone floor, a wood stove, heavy pottery on shelves. The light came from oil lamps, not electric fixtures, and the window looked out onto water, a vast, gray sea under a heavy sky. Kurenai was there. She was sitting at a wooden table, hands wrapped around a cup of something that steamed, and she was staring out the window at the sea with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Open, unguarded. Young, somehow, as if the dream had peeled back years of armor and found the woman underneath. "Where are we?" he asked. "I don't know, it's not the bridge." She looked at him. "The bond space is changing, growing maybe to match the increased integration." The kitchen felt real. Not with the overwhelming verisimilitude of the original Genjutsu, no phantom ring, no Mikoto, no manufactured domesticity, but with a quieter authenticity. This was a simple room. Stone and wood and lamplight and the sound of the sea. It feels like somewhere that existed, Naruto said. He touched the wall. The stone was rough and cool under his fingers. And Uzumaki Place, maybe. The architecture feels right. You'd know. I think I would, yeah. There's something about the seal characters built into the stonework. He crouched and ran his fingers along the base of the wall, where faint spiral patterns were carved into the stone. This is structural sealing. The Uzumaki integrated seals into their buildings: protection, preservation, reinforcement. These are old, really old. So the bond space is drawing on Uzumaki architectural memory. Kurenai sipped her drink. Interesting. The resonance seal originated from the Uzumaki tradition. As it deepens, it's pulling more cultural context into the shared space. They sat across the table from each other. 2 cups, 2 people. A stone room with a view of the sea. It was simple and quiet and intimate in a way that didn't need the manufactured warmth of the Genjutsu kitchen. This was something rawer. 2 people in a room. I felt your dreams last night, Naruto said, when you were sleeping. Kurenai's cup paused halfway to her mouth. I didn't mean to, he said quickly. The bond opened up when your walls went down in sleep. I felt fragments, sense memories, the cigarette smoke, the laugh, he swallowed. Asuma. She set the cup down. The sea moved outside the window, slow and gray and patient. What did you feel? She asked. Her voice was careful, not defensive, just careful. Your grief, the weight of it, how long you've carried it. He met her eyes. How much space it takes up. And I understand now. Why the Genjutsu hit you so hard. It wasn't just the surprise or the violation. It was because the seal found the empty space where Asuma was and built something to fill it, and feeling that space filled, even for a few minutes, was cruel, she finished. Yes. It was the cruelest thing anyone has ever done to me. The words should have cut. They did cut. He felt the blade of them through the bond, sharp and clean. But beneath the pain of hearing it, there was something else. Her honesty, raw and unprotected. She was telling him the truth because the dream space demanded truth, or because the bond was making artifice increasingly difficult, or because she was tired of holding it all so tightly. I'm sorry, he said. It was the 3rd time he'd said it, and each time it carried more weight and less adequacy. I can't undo what the Genjutsu showed you, but I can promise you something. What? If we dissolve this bond, when we dissolve it, I won't forget what it showed me, the space where Asuma was. The weight you carry. I'll know, and I won't pretend I don't. She studied him across the table in the lamplight, in this stone room by the sea that belonged to neither of them, and both of them, and a dead clan, whose last member was a 17-year-old boy who didn't know how to be subtle, except when it mattered most. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? A loud, well-meaning boy with more power than sense who would either panic about this situation or try to turn it into a joke. And instead, she held his gaze, the sea murmured outside, the lamps flickered. Instead, I got someone who reads my grief in his sleep and apologizes for understanding me. The dream dissolved. Gently, like fog burning off water, the stone room faded. The sea went silent, the lamplight dimmed to nothing. Naruto woke in the barn, in the hay, with the pre-dawn light cold on his face and the bond singing a low, steady note in his chest. Across the barn, Kurenai's eyes were open. She was lying on her side, looking at him through the dim light, and for one unguarded moment before the walls came up and the jounin reasserted itself over the woman, her expression was the one from the dream space. Open, unarmored. And looking at him like he was a puzzle she was no longer sure she wanted to solve. Then she blinked, and it was gone, and she was Kurenai-sensei again, composed and professional and already getting up to prepare for the day. But the bond remembered what her face had looked like, and so did he. The 5th day brought trouble. They were 2 hours past the hot springs border, moving through a stretch of forest that Shikamaru's route had identified as low risk, when Naruto's perimeter seals triggered. He raised a fist. The team stopped instantly, dropping into cover positions with the synchronized response of trained operatives. Yamato melted behind a tree. Shikamaru crouched behind a boulder. Kurenai vanished, not with a technique, just with the sheer physical skill of a jounin who could disappear in an open room. Naruto held still and listened. The seal network he'd planted was feeding him information, 3 signatures, human, approaching from the east, moving in a pattern that was too deliberate for travelers and too loose for military. Bandits. Probably. The northern territories were lousy with them. Missing nin who'd gone freelance, rogue samurai, civilian criminals who'd learned enough basic chakra molding to be dangerous. 3 of them would be nothing for this team, except the bond spiked. Not the slow, deep-and-endworm pattern he'd become accustomed to. A sharp, jagged pulse, like a warning bell. He felt Kurenai's alarm a split second before he understood why. She'd seen something he hadn't. Her Genjutsu-trained perception had caught a detail in the approaching signatures that his sensor seals had missed. They're not bandits. The thought came through the bond with startling clarity, not words exactly, but a concept, a fully formed tactical assessment transmitted through emotional resonance. They're shinobi, trained, suppressing their signatures. Naruto refocused his sensor array. She was right. The signatures were disguised. The raw shapes looked like untrained civilians, but beneath the disguise, the chakra patterns were controlled, disciplined. Professional, he signed to Shikamaru. 3 hostiles, shinobi level, suppressed signatures, east approach. Shikamaru's eyes narrowed. He signed back. Engage or evade. Naruto looked at Kurenai's position. He couldn't see her, she was that good, but he could feel her through the bond, a focused point of red-sharp awareness 15 meters to his right. The bond transmitted her assessment. They're on an intercept course. They know we're here. Evasion compromised. He relayed this to Shikamaru. Shikamaru signed. Ambush. Standard. Naruto draws, Kurenai traps, Yamato contains, I coordinate. They moved, Naruto stepped out of cover. It was the simplest version of the oldest trick, the visible target, the bait. He walked forward along the trail with his hands in his pockets, and his posture deliberately casual, projecting the body language of a careless teenager who hadn't noticed the 3 signatures converging on his position. The first attacker came from the tree line to his left. Fast, silent, with a tanto drawn and a killing strike aimed at his neck. Standard root assassination approach, the Anbu derivative style that prioritized single lethal strikes over extended engagement. Root. Naruto caught the blade between 2 fingers. He'd been expecting it since the moment Kurenai's assessment came through the bond, trained shinobi on an intercept course, suppressing their signatures, operating in a neutral country outside normal mission parameters. That was Root's profile. Danzo had sent them. The attacker tried to disengage. Naruto didn't let him. He twisted the tanto out of the man's grip and drove a knee into his solar plexus, folding him over, then hit him with a chakra disruption strike to the base of the skull. Not lethal, not gentle either, the second attacker had engaged Yamato. Wood-release pillars erupted from the ground, boxing the operative into a shrinking cage of living timber. The root agent was good, fast, skilled, fighting with the emotionless efficiency of Danzo's training, but Yamato was better. The cage closed. The agent was pinned. The third operative didn't attack. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and stood perfectly still, and when Naruto turned to face him, he raised both hands empty, palms out. "I'm not here to fight," the operative said. His voice was flat, inflectionless, the root monotone. "I carry a message." "From Danzo," Kurenai said, appearing behind him. She hadn't touched him. She didn't need to. Her presence alone, materializing from nothing at his back, was enough to communicate the threat. "From Danzo-sama, yes." The operative didn't turn around. He kept his empty hands raised and his eyes on Naruto. "He is aware of the situation. He offers his assistance." "His assistance," Naruto repeated. "Danzo-sama has resources relevant to your mission, Uzumaki texts recovered from private collections. Intelligence on the current state of the Yuzashio ruins, logistical support for the expedition." The operative paused. "He asks only for a meeting upon your return, A conversation, nothing more. Shikamaru emerged from behind his boulder, hands still in the shadow possession seal position. His shadow stretched across the ground, touching the shadow of the operative who'd attacked Naruto, holding the unconscious man in place. "And if we decline?" Shikamaru asked. "Then you decline. Danzo-sama is not making a demand, he is making an offer." "An offer delivered by 3 operatives who attempted to ambush us," Kurenai said. Her voice was ice. "2 operatives attempted to test your capabilities. I delivered the message. The test was not my decision, and I apologize for it." The operative was calm. Genuinely calm, not the artificial calm of suppressed emotion. He'd been trained out of everything that made a person reactive, and what was left was a tool that spoke with a human voice. Naruto felt a wave of revulsion that was partly his and partly Kurenai's, transmitted through the bond, their shared disgust at what Danzo did to people. "The offer is declined," Naruto said. "I will relay your decision. And tell Danzo this." Naruto stepped forward. The operative didn't flinch, but something in the set of his shoulders shifted, a subtle bracing, the body acknowledging a threat that the conditioned mind refused to recognize. "If he sends anyone after us again, I won't be polite about it." The operative nodded once. Kurenai stepped aside, letting him pass. He collected his 2 incapacitated colleagues, both conscious now but immobilized by Shikamaru's shadow and Yamato's wood, and disappeared into the trees with the silent efficiency of smoke dissipating. The team regrouped. The clearing was quiet except for the sounds of the forest reasserting itself, birds resuming their calls, insects picking up their rhythms. "Well," Yamato said, "that answers the question of whether Danzo knows." "He knew before we left," Shikamaru said. "The hospital records." "He's probably known since day 2. He looked at Naruto. "The offer was genuine, by the way. Danzo doesn't bluff. He has Uzumaki texts we don't, and he probably does have intelligence on the ruins." "And the price is a conversation," Kurenai said, "which means the price is information." "He wants to understand the bond, learn its parameters, assess its potential for weaponization." "Probably." "Then the answer stays no." They moved out. The encounter had cost them an hour and whatever sense of security the first 4 days had established. The forest felt different now. Watched, measured, a space that contained eyes they couldn't see. Naruto ran point with his sensor array at maximum extension, and beside the outward vigilance, the bond was doing something new. He could feel Kurenai's tactical awareness layered over his own, not replacing his perception but augmenting it, adding depth and angle. She saw the forest differently than he did. Her Genjutsu training made her alert to patterns and anomalies in sensory data, the subtle wrongnesses that indicated illusion or concealment. His sensor seals detected chakra signatures and physical disturbances. Together, channeled through the bond, their 2 modes of perception wove into something more complete than either alone. He could feel her noticing it too. The novelty, the unexpected utility, the way their combined awareness covered gaps that each of them had individually. The bond wasn't just connecting them emotionally. It was making them tactically superior. Naruto thought of Danzo's offer and understood, with a cold clarity, exactly why the old man wanted this technique. That night, camped on a clifftop overlooking the sea, they had the conversation they'd been avoiding. Yamato was on watch, out of earshot. Shikamaru sat with them by the fire, his journal open but his pen still, knowing that what was about to happen wasn't something that could be captured in notes. Kurenai started it. She had to, the discipline required was hers to provide. Naruto would have circled the subject for hours, approaching and retreating, too afraid of her reaction to push. She knew this because the bond told her, and the bond couldn't be argued with. The tactical integration. She said, "During the root encounter, you felt it." "Yeah, our perceptions merged, partially, temporarily, but meaningfully." "Yeah." "That was at 40%. By the time we reach Yuzashio, we could be at 50 or beyond. The integration is going to keep deepening." The emotional sharing, the tactical merging, the dream states, all of it. "I know." She looked at the fire. The flames threw shifting patterns across her face, and the sea beyond the cliff was a dark, murmuring vastness. I need to say something, and I need you to hear it without reacting until I'm finished. Naruto nodded. The bond is changing how I feel about you. The words came out steady, controlled, but the bond told him what they cost her, a slow, grinding effort, like pushing a boulder uphill. Not the artificial feelings from the Genjutsu. Real changes. The emotional sharing is creating empathy that wouldn't exist otherwise. The tactical integration is building trust at a speed that's abnormal. And the dream space, she paused. In the dream space, I see you without your defenses, and you see me without mine, and that kind of mutual vulnerability creates intimacy whether we want it to or not. Naruto was very still. The fire crackled. Shikamaru was a shadow in the periphery, present but invisible. I need you to understand. Kurenai continued, that whatever I feel toward you, whatever is growing between us, is a product of the bond. It's real in the sense that the emotions are genuinely experienced, but it's artificial in the sense that they wouldn't exist without the seal's influence. When we dissolve the bond, these feelings will dissolve with it. That's what Akane Senju's journal described. The absence. The loss of something that felt real but was generated by the connection. You're saying you're starting to have feelings for me and you want me to know it's the bond talking. The directness hit her like cold water. He saw it in her face, the brief flash of being caught, of having her careful framing stripped down to its raw core by someone who didn't know how to be indirect. Yes, she said. That's what I'm saying. Okay. He looked at the fire. Can I react now? Yes. I think you're wrong. Kurenai blinked. Not about the bond influencing our feelings. That's probably true, but about the assumption that everything we feel is manufactured. He turned to face her, and the firelight caught his eyes and turned them into something fierce. The bond found a connection that was already there. Tsunade said it, the resonance seal responds to genuine emotional connection. It doesn't create something from nothing, it amplifies what exists. What existed between us before the bond was a professional acquaintance, nothing more, maybe. Or maybe it was potential. Things that could have been if we'd ever had a reason to look at each other as anything other than what the village told us we were. The Genjutsu mistress and the loud kid. The Jounin and the Genin. You said it yourself, I see you as a mystery, a person to be understood. That's not the bond, that's me. Kurenai stared at him, the fire popped, the sea breathed against the cliffs below. This isn't the time for this conversation, Shikamaru said quietly from the shadows. They both turned to him. He was looking at the fire, not at them, his expression unreadable. You're in the middle of a mission. The bond is progressing. You're both sleep-deprived and emotionally compromised. Nothing either of you says tonight should be treated as definitive. He was right. They both knew he was right. The relief was almost physical, a release valve, an excuse to step back from the edge of something neither of them was ready for. Get some sleep, Shikamaru said. Both of you. Separate watches, separate dreams if you can manage it. We reach the coast tomorrow. Save the emotional reckoning for when we're not in hostile territory. Naruto went to his bedroll. Kurenai went to hers. The space between them was 6 feet and a world. But as he lay in the dark, feeling the bond settle into its nighttime rhythm, he heard her voice through the connection. Not words, not a thought, but an emotion shaped like a sentence, transmitted through the resonance with the clarity of a bell in still air. You might be right. And that terrifies me. He closed his eyes and let the bond carry them both into sleep. And the stone room by the sea was waiting. And this time, without discussion, without decision, they sat on the same side of the table and watched the waves in silence. Two people balanced on the edge of something that was either a mistake or a beginning, and too tangled by now to tell the difference. Chapter 4. Cracks in the mask, the coast appeared on the 6th morning like a wound in the earth, cliffs dropping sheer into gray water, the sea stretching flat and enormous under a sky the color of wet iron. Naruto stood at the cliff's edge and felt the wind hit his face and tasted salt and heard, beneath the crash of waves on rock, a sound that didn't come from outside, a humming. Low and resonant, coming from the seal on his wrist, The seal was reacting to the sea. To the direction of the sea, specifically east, toward the open water, toward the island that wasn't visible from here, but that his blood knew was there the way a compass needle knows north. "Yuzashio," he said. Kurenai stepped up beside him. The wind caught her hair and threw it across her face, and she didn't brush it away. She was looking east too, and through the bond he felt something from her that he hadn't felt before, a borrowed resonance, a faint echo of the pull he was feeling, transmitted through their connection. His ancestral call, shared with her. "You can feel it," she said, "not a question. The seal knows we're close. The Uzumaki chakra in me is responding to, I don't know, proximity to the homeland, like a homing signal." "How far?" He closed his eyes and let the pull speak. It was directional, a gentle but persistent tug toward the east-northeast, and the strength of it gave him an intuitive sense of distance the way the warmth of a fire tells you how close you are. Half a day by water. Maybe less. Shikamaru appeared at his shoulder, field journal open. Jiraiya's notes indicate a fishing village 3 kilometers north along the coast. Abandoned, but the docks might still be functional. We can source a boat there. "Abandoned fishing village," Yamato said from behind them. "That's never ominous." They moved along the cliff road, single file, the sea booming below. The wind was constant and cold, carrying the smell of brine and kelp and the faintly metallic tang of deep water. Naruto kept his sensor array extended, but found the coastal environment difficult to read too much ambient chakra noise from the ocean itself. The massive energy of moving water creating a background hum that masked smaller signatures. The fishing village was exactly what Shikamaru had described. A cluster of wooden buildings huddled against the cliff, weathered gray by salt and wind, empty for what looked like decades. The dock was in better shape than the buildings, stone foundations, heavy timber, built to endure. 2 boats remained in the water, tethered and half-swamped but structurally sound. Yamato examined them with a craftsman's eye. "This one's salvageable. The hull is solid. I can reinforce it with wood release and seal the leaks." While Yamato worked on the boat, Naruto walked through the village. The buildings were small homes, a general store, what might have been an inn. All empty, all gutted by time and weather. But in the largest building, tucked in a back room behind a collapsed shelf, he found something that stopped him in his tracks, a spiral, carved into the wall. The Uzumaki spiral, the same symbol that decorated Konoha's flak jackets, but rendered here with a precision and depth that spoke of intention, not decoration. It was a seal. Small, subtle, worked into the stone wall of a fishing village on the coast of Whirlpool Country, and it was still active. He touched it. His chakra flowed into the spiral, and the seal responded. A click, a shift, a section of wall sliding sideways to reveal a hidden compartment no larger than a bread box. Inside was a scroll, sealed with wax that bore the Uzumaki crest, preserved in perfect condition by the dormant seal. His hands shook as he broke the wax. The scroll was short. A message. Written in Uzumaki script that he'd spent a year learning to read, the characters flowing and precise. "To any child of the Whirlpool who finds this, if you are reading this, then Yuzashio has fallen and you have come home anyway. The island will know you. The seals will know you. Go to the spiral quarter. Go to the sealing hall. What remains of our knowledge is there, protected beyond the reach of those who destroyed us. The hall requires 3 things to enter: the blood of the clan, the chakra of the clan, and the intent of the heart. Remember, our seals do not lie and they cannot be lied to. Whatever you bring to the hall, bring it honestly." Uzumaki Ashina, clan head, 3rd generation Naruto read it twice. Then he rolled it carefully and tucked it inside his jacket and stood in the ruined building and pressed his forehead against the wall and breathed. A clan head had written this. In the final days, knowing the village would fall, someone had taken the time to leave a message for the survivors who might come looking. A breadcrumb. A welcome home. He'd never had a welcome home. The bond transmitted his emotion before he could contain it, a raw, unprocessed surge of grief and gratitude, and belonging that hit Kurenai like a wave breaking. She was outside the building, reviewing the route with Shikamaru, and she stumbled. Shikamaru caught her arm. "What, Naruto?" She pressed her hand to her chest. "He found something." Naruto came out of the building with the scroll in his hand, and his eyes bright, and a feeling in his chest like his ribs had cracked open to let something in that had been trying to get in his entire life. "I know how to enter the sealing hall," he said. He showed them the scroll. Shikamaru read it with his quick, consuming focus. Kurenai read it over his shoulder, and Naruto felt her processing the information through the bond, the analytical mind categorizing, cross-referencing, building implications. "Blood, chakra, and intent," Shikamaru said. "The first two you have. The third is the variable." "The intent of the heart," Kurenai quoted. "Consistent with the dissolution fragments, the truth of the heart. The Uzumaki seals respond to genuine intention. You can't approach the hall with deception." "I'm not planning to deceive anything." "I know, but intent is complicated. If you approach the hall wanting to dissolve the bond, but carrying conflicted feelings about dissolution." She stopped. The implication hung in the air. If the hall read his intent and found ambivalence, if some part of him didn't want the bond dissolved, the seal might not cooperate. Naruto looked at the scroll in his hands. The ink was decades old, and the message was meant for someone who might never come, and the person who wrote it was dead, and the village it directed him to was ruins. "Let's go," he said. The crossing took 4 hours. Yamato's reinforced boat cut through gray swells under a low sky, the sea restless and vast around them. Naruto sat at the bow and faced east, and the pull in his chest grew stronger with every nautical mile, the seal on his wrist humming at a frequency he could feel in his teeth. The island appeared out of the haze like a dream solidifying. Dark cliffs, dense forest, and rising from the center of the island's mass, the broken silhouette of a city. Towers that had been tall and were now truncated, walls that had been whole and were now gap-toothed. The skeleton of Yuzashio, stripped of flesh by war and time, but still standing, still recognizable as something that had once been magnificent. The harbor was destroyed, stone breakwaters shattered by explosions that had happened before Naruto was born, the docks reduced to barnacled stumps jutting from the water. Yamato guided the boat through the debris, and they beached on a narrow strip of rocky shore beneath the eastern wall. They climbed. Through a breach in the outer wall, one of the 3 Jiraiya had marked on his map, and into the ruins. Yuzashio was not what Naruto had expected. He'd imagined rubble, devastation. The kind of total destruction that war left behind, where nothing remained above knee-height and everything was ash. Instead, the city was present. Wounded, yes. Broken in places, collapsed in others, overtaken by vegetation in many. But present. Buildings still stood. Streets were still navigable. The Uzumaki's structural seals had done their work. Even decades after the clan's destruction, the preservation formulas embedded in the stonework had slowed decay to a crawl. The city was dying, but it was dying slowly, with dignity, holding its shape against time the way the old hold their posture against age. Naruto walked through streets that his family had walked. His sandals touched stone that Uzumaki feet had worn smooth. The spiral crest appeared everywhere, carved into walls, inlaid in paths, worked into the architecture with the pervasive presence of a symbol that wasn't decorative but structural. Every spiral was a seal. The entire city was a seal array, interconnected, interlocking, a single vast formula written in stone and steel and the bones of buildings, and it was waking up. He felt it first as a tingling in his extremities, his fingertips, his toes, the back of his neck. Then a warmth that spread inward, rising through his body like blood returning to a cold limb. The seal on his wrist blazed purple-white, brighter than it had ever been, and the city's dormant seal network responded to his presence like a sleeping animal stirring at the sound of its name. Lights appeared. Faint, scattered, flickering to life in the ruins around them, seal formulas in doorways and windows and cornerstones, activating one by one as his chakra rippled outward through the network. A sequence, a cascade, each seal triggering the next, the city's ancient infrastructure recognizing clan chakra for the first time in decades and beginning to wake. Gods, Yamato breathed. Shikamaru had his journal out, writing furiously. The preservation seals, they're activating, the city is. Resuming function. Not fully, Kurenai said. She'd stopped walking and was standing very still, her red eyes scanning the ruins with the focused intensity of a Genjutsu specialist encountering something she'd never seen. The seals are responding to Naruto's chakra, but selectively. Look, some are activating, some aren't. The city is reading him, deciding what to show him. She was right. Naruto could feel it now. The network wasn't just activating uniformly, it was making choices. Some seals flared to life as he passed. Others remained dark, dormant, waiting for something he hadn't provided yet. The city was sentient in a way. Not alive, not thinking, but responsive. An immune system recognizing friendly cells and rejecting foreign ones. This way. Naruto said, and he didn't know how he knew, but the pull was no longer a vague eastward tug. It was specific, directional. A path lit by activating seals leading inward toward the center of the city. Toward the spiral quarter, they followed the path. Through streets that became narrower and older, the architecture shifting from the relatively modern outer districts to something more ancient. The buildings here were lower, built from darker stone, and the seal work was denser, every surface covered in interlocking spiral formulas that pulsed with faint light as Naruto passed. The spiral quarter was the heart of the city. The original settlement, the place where the first Uzumaki had built the first seals and founded the tradition that would become a civilization. The streets here weren't grid-patterned, they spiraled inward, concentric circles tightening toward a center, and at that center, the sealing hall. It was the only building in the city that was completely intact. Not damaged, not decayed, not touched by the war that had destroyed everything around it. It stood at the center of the spiral like the eye of a storm, a circular building, 3 stories of dark stone, every surface covered in seal work so dense and intricate that the walls seemed to shimmer. A single entrance, a heavy door of iron and stone, closed. Naruto approached. The pull in his chest was a roar now, a tide of recognition and welcome and something that felt absurdly like love. The city's ancient network greeting him, the last child of the clan, the last Uzumaki, come home. Be careful, Kurenai said behind him. Her voice was tight. Through the bond, he felt her tension, not fear exactly, but the heightened alertness of a combat veteran entering an unknown space. She trusted the seal's welcome. She didn't trust what might be inside. He stopped in front of the door. The iron surface was covered in characters, not the same Uzumaki script he'd been studying, but an older variant, more angular, harder to read. He recognized fragments. Blood, chakra, heart, truth, enter, know, become. Whatever you bring to the hall, bring it honestly, he bit his thumb. Blood welled, bright red. He pressed it to the door. The seal network detonated. Not destructively, there was no explosion, no force. But every seal in the spiral quarter activated simultaneously, a cascade of light that turned the ancient streets incandescent. The door's characters blazed white. The iron heated under his hand, not burning, not painful, but warm in the specific way that the bond's warmth was warm, the temperature of recognition. He pushed his chakra into the door. Not a trickle, a flood. The full weight of his reserves, Uzumaki dense and vast, poured into the ancient formula like water into a dry riverbed. The door opened. Inside was dark. Then, as he stepped across the threshold, it wasn't. The sealing hall was a single circular room, much larger than the building's exterior suggested. Spatial seals. He realized the same principle that made storage scrolls work, applied to architecture. The walls curved upward into a domed ceiling, and every surface, floor, walls, dome, was covered in seal work. Not the structural preservation formulas of the city, but something else entirely. These were knowledge seals, storage formulas. The entire history and accumulated wisdom of the Uzumaki sealing tradition. written on the walls of a room that existed outside normal space. In the center of the room, on a raised stone platform, sat a single object. A spiral-bound book, its cover blank, its pages sealed shut with a formula that glowed faintly in the ambient light. And standing next to the platform, watching him with eyes that were red and gold and ancient and not quite human, was a woman. She was tall, dark-haired. Her features carried the sharp, angular beauty of the Uzumaki bloodline, and her clothing was archaic, robes of deep blue, tied with a red cord, the spiral crest embroidered at her throat. She stood with the stillness of someone who had been waiting for a very long time and had learned the patience of stone. She was not alive. Naruto knew this instantly, the way you know a painting isn't a person. Something about her was representational rather than real. A projection, a construct. An echo left in the seal work to serve a function. "Welcome home," the construct said, and her voice resonated through the room and through the seal network and through the bond and through every part of Naruto that had ever felt alone. "I am the keeper. I was left here to guide those who come after." Behind him, he heard Kurenai, Shikamaru, and Yamato enter the hall. The keeper's red-gold eyes moved to them, assessed them, and returned to Naruto. "You carry the blood and the chakra," the keeper said, "but you are not alone. You have brought others." Her gaze settled on Kurenai. "And one of them is bound to you," Naruto swallowed. "Yes, the resonance bond, I can feel it, young, incomplete." The keeper tilted her head, and the gesture was almost human but not quite, a fraction too smooth, a degree too precise. "And accidental. Yes. That has never happened before. So I've been told." The keeper was silent for a moment. In the silence, the seal work on the walls pulsed, a slow, rhythmic glow like a heartbeat. The room's heartbeat, the clan's heartbeat. "You have come to dissolve the bond," the keeper said. "Yes." "Are you certain?" The question was simple, and it was devastating. Two words that cut through every layer of rationalization and analysis and emotional management that Naruto had built over the past week and exposed the raw thing underneath. Was he certain? He'd told Kurenai he would fix this. He'd promised to set her free. He'd committed to the dissolution with the absolute determination that was his defining trait, the refusal to leave a problem unsolved. But the bond had shown him things. The shared perception, the tactical integration. The way Kurenai's mind complemented his, her precision to his power, her depth to his breadth. The dreams, the stone room by the sea, the bridge, the feeling of not being alone for the first time in his life. And beneath all of that, buried so deep he'd barely acknowledged it to himself, the kitchen. The ring. The child with red eyes and whisker marks who could make butterflies with her hands. "Are you certain?" "I came here to find the option," Naruto said. "Whether we use it is a decision we make together." The keeper studied him. Then she smiled, and the smile was the most human thing about her, warm and sad and knowing. An honest answer. The hall accepts it. She stepped aside, revealing the spiral-bound book on its platform. "This is the archive. The complete record of Uzumaki sealing knowledge, preserved in knowledge seal format. When you touch it, the information will be transferred directly to your mind, all of it, including the dissolution right for the resonance bond. All of it." Shikamaru said from behind Naruto, his voice carrying the particular tension of a man who had just been told that a complete library was about to be downloaded into someone's brain. "How much information are we talking about?" "Centuries of accumulated sealing knowledge. The life's work of every Uzumaki seal master since the clan's founding." The keeper looked at Naruto. "Your mind will survive it. Uzumaki minds are built for this. Your chakra density includes neurological reinforcement. It will be overwhelming, but not damaging." "Overwhelming," Yamato muttered. "Wonderful." Naruto approached the platform. The book sat on the stone, glowing faintly, waiting. He could feel it through the seal on his wrist, a vast presence, dense with information, like standing at the base of a mountain and feeling its weight. He reached for it. "Wait," Kurenai said. He turned. She was standing at the edge of the platform, her red eyes bright in the hall's ambient light, and through the bond he felt something he hadn't felt from her before, urgency without control. Raw need pushing through her careful discipline. "Before you do this," she said, "I need to tell you something." The room was very quiet. Shikamaru and Yamato stood near the entrance, giving them space without being asked. The keeper watched with her ancient, patient eyes. Kurenai stepped onto the platform, 3 feet from him. Close enough to touch if either of them had been willing to risk it. "The feelings I described," she said. "The ones I attributed to the bond, the growing empathy, the trust, the intimacy. You said they'd dissolve with the bond. I said that because I needed it to be true." Her voice cracked. "Not much, a hairline fracture in a wall that had held for years. But through the bond, the crack was a canyon, and what Naruto felt pouring through it was not the careful, controlled woman he'd been traveling with for 6 days, but someone else entirely. Someone who had been alone for so long that the prospect of connection, real connection, chosen connection, not manufactured by grief or duty or a seal, was the most terrifying thing she could imagine. "Some of what I feel is the bond," she said. "I know that. The speed of it, the intensity, the way it's compressed years of potential relationship into days, that's the seal's influence. But the direction of it." She pressed her hand to her chest, over the anchor point where the bond lived. "I felt your grief for Jiraiya, and it made me want to share mine for Asuma. I watched you read a dead clan head's message, and it made me want to be part of whatever you build from the ashes. I sit across a table from you and I want to hear what you think about things that have nothing to do with seals or bonds or missions. That's not manufactured. That's not an artifact. That's me." Naruto stood very still. The book glowed beside him. The keeper waited. The seal work pulsed. "I'm 33, Kurenai said, and this time the number sounded different, not a barrier but a fact, offered without weight. "I loved Asuma. He's dead. I've been alone for years, and I've been fine, and I will be fine regardless of what happens here. But I am standing in this room telling you that some of what I feel for you is mine, because you asked me to be honest, and because the hall requires it, and because—" she faltered. The crack widened. "Because you deserve to know before you touch that book. The dissolution rite requires that both partners genuinely want the bond dissolved. If I'm not certain, it might not work. And I'm not certain, Naruto. I thought I was. I told you I was. I was wrong." The room breathed. The seals pulsed. The sea murmured against the island's cliffs, felt through the stone. Naruto looked at her. This woman, this impossible, infuriating, beautiful, armored woman who had just broken herself open in front of him because an ancient clan's magic demanded honesty, and she was too brave to refuse. "Kurenai," he said. "Just her name. No suffix. No title. The name itself, spoken in the sealing hall of a dead clan, with the full weight of a resonance bond carrying the truth of how he said it." Her eyes widened. The bond transmitted the sound of her name as he experienced it. Not just the phonemes, but the meaning he'd wrapped around them, the accumulated significance of every moment since the training ground, every shared dream, every midnight conversation through the floor. Every moment of reluctant admiration and growing tenderness, and the fierce, protective, impossible thing that had been building in him since the first time he'd felt her grief and wanted to carry some of it. "I don't know what I want," he said. "I know what I should want. I should want to dissolve this and let you go and pretend this was a mistake and move on. But I can't stand here in front of—" he gestured at the room, the walls, the knowledge of his ancestors, "in front of all of this and lie about it." He stepped toward her. 1 step. The bond sang. "What I feel is mine, too. Not all of it. You're right. Some of it is the seal, the speed, the compression. But underneath that, there's something that was there before the seal. Something that was there in the training ground when you told me to show you what I could do, and I wanted to show you everything, not just the technique. I wanted you to see me." She was shaking. Fine tremors, visible in her hands, transmitted through the bond as a vibration he could feel in his own chest. Not fear, not distress, the physical expression of walls falling down. "We have a choice," he said. "The book has the dissolution right. I'll learn it." And then we decide, together, honestly, with full knowledge, what we want to do with it. Maybe we dissolve the bond and walk away. Maybe we don't. But we make the choice because it's ours to make, not because a seal decided for us. That's not how the world works, Kurenai said. Her voice was rough. You're 17, I'm your elder, the village would. I don't care what the village would, you should. I care what you would, that's what I care about. She looked at him for a long time. The sealing hall held its breath. The book glowed on its platform, patient as a stone, patient as the dead who had left it for the living. Kurenai reached out and took his hand. The bond erupted. Not the single clear note of their accidental touch during route planning. This was a symphony, a full-spectrum resonance that cascaded through both their chakra systems simultaneously. Every channel opening, every micro-connection firing, the bond leaping from 45% to something immeasurably higher in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The sealing hall's walls blazed with light. The seal work on the floor erupted in spiraling patterns that raced outward from where they stood, and the book on the platform glowed so brightly that Shikamaru and Yamato had to shield their eyes. Naruto felt everything. Her, all of her. Not thoughts. The bond didn't work that way, but the shape of her. The architecture of Kurenai Yuhai laid open in his awareness like a city seen from above. Her discipline, the iron framework that held everything in place. Her grief, the deep foundation that she'd built on because it was too vast to remove. Her loneliness, a quiet room in the center of the structure, furnished for one, with a window that looked out on nothing, and her warmth. Buried deeper than everything else, beneath the control and the grief and the solitude, a warmth that had been waiting, banked and patient, for something to burn for. She was feeling him too. He knew because he could feel her reaction to what she found, surprise first, at the depth of his complexity. He wasn't what she'd expected. The loud boy, the simple heart, the brute force, those were the exterior walls. Inside was something labyrinthine and tender and fierce, a loneliness that matched hers in scale if not in kind, and a capacity for love that was frankly terrifying in its magnitude. They stood hand in hand in the sealing hall, and the bond sang between them, and the walls pulsed with light, and neither of them moved, neither of them spoke, because what was happening didn't require words. The resonance was doing what it was designed to do, showing two people to each other completely without deception. The keeper watched them with her ancient smile. So, she said softly, not entirely accidental then. The light faded, the resonance settled. The bond was still there, stronger now, much stronger, a deep and steady current instead of a tentative stream, but calmed, like a river that had flooded and found its new banks. Naruto looked down at their joined hands. Kurenai's fingers were laced through his. She wasn't letting go. We should. He started. Touch the book, Kurenai said. Get the knowledge, all of it. Then we'll decide. He kept her hand in his left and reached out with his right and laid his palm flat on the cover of the spiral-bound book. The world went white. Knowledge poured in like water through a broken dam. Not words, not images, not memories. Understanding. Direct, unmediated comprehension, bypassing language and perception entirely, writing itself into the structures of his mind with the precision of a master calligrapher and the speed of a lightning strike. Uzumaki sealing. The complete tradition. Every formula, every principle, every technique, every innovation, every failure. Every discovery accumulated over centuries of work by the most gifted seal masters the shinobi world had ever produced. It came in layers. Foundational theory first, the grammar of the art, the rules that governed how chakra and intention could be fixed in physical form. Then application, the thousands of specific techniques, from simple storage seals to the vast, civilization-scale formulas that had protected Yuzashio cure. Then the advanced work, the experimental techniques, the theoretical frontiers, the places where the Uzumaki had pushed their art into territory that bordered on the divine. And threaded through all of it, like a river running through a landscape, the knowledge of the resonance bond. He understood it now, completely. Not just the mechanics, those he'd grasped in fragments from Jiraiya's notes, but the meaning. The resonance bond was the Uzumaki clan's answer to a fundamental question. How do you bridge the gap between two separate beings? How do you create true understanding between two minds that can never directly share experience? The answer was chakra. Chakra was the medium through which all life expressed itself, and the Uzumaki had discovered that two people's chakra systems could be linked, not merged, not fused, but tuned to each other, like two instruments playing in harmony. The resonance bond didn't make two people into one. It made two people into a pair that could hear each other's music, and the dissolution rite, yes, it existed. The knowledge was there, clear and complete, a procedure, a process. A way to sever the connection cleanly, without damage, without the catastrophic collapse that Tsunade had feared from forced extraction. But it required something specific. Something that couldn't be faked or forced. Both partners had to enter the bond space, the shared dreamscape, the bridge or the stone room or whatever form it took, and they had to choose. Not just rationally, not just verbally. With the full weight of their authentic desire, their genuine intent, their truth of the heart. If both partners truly wanted dissolution, the bond would release cleanly. The channels would close. The resonance would fade. They would separate, intact, whole, with nothing lost except the connection itself. If either partner didn't truly want dissolution, if ambivalence existed, if hidden desire contradicted stated intent, the rite would fail. Not dangerously. It simply wouldn't work. The bond could not be dissolved by anything less than honest mutual consent, because the bond itself was built on the principle of honesty between partners. You couldn't lie to it. You couldn't lie to each other through it, and you couldn't lie to yourself within it. Naruto opened his eyes. He was on his knees on the platform. The book was dark, its glow extinguished, its contents transferred. Kurenai was kneeling beside him, her hand still in his, her face tight with concern. "How long?" he asked. His voice was hoarse. 11 seconds. Shikamaru said from the edge of the platform, where he'd been standing with one hand on his kunai pouch and both eyes locked on Naruto. "You went rigid, your eyes rolled back, and you dropped. 11 seconds. What happened?" "I got everything." Naruto pressed his free hand to his temple. The knowledge was settling, finding its places in his mind, organizing itself into accessible structures. It was vast, overwhelmingly vast, but his mind was holding it, accommodating it, expanding to fit the way an Uzumaki mind was apparently designed to do. The complete sealing tradition. All of it. "And the dissolution rite?" Kurenai asked. "It's there." He looked at her. "It works, it's safe, no damage to either person's chakra system." Relief flooded through the bond from her end. Genuine, powerful, the release of a fear she'd been carrying since Tsunade first said the word irreversible. "But," he said, and the relief stuttered. "But, it requires genuine mutual consent. Both partners have to truly want dissolution. If either of us is conflicted, the rite fails." The silence that followed was thick enough to lean on. Kurenai looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them looked away. "We need to discuss this," Kurenai said carefully. "We do? Not here, not now. We need to be somewhere secure, somewhere we can think clearly." The keeper, who had been watching in silence, spoke. "You may use the hall. This space is protected. No external force can reach you here, and the seal work facilitates emotional clarity. Many bonded pairs have used this room to navigate difficult conversations." "Right." Kurenai took a breath. "Then we'll stay." She looked at Shikamaru and Yamato. "Can you secure a perimeter outside? We need time." Shikamaru nodded. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make comments. He simply turned and walked toward the entrance, and Yamato followed, and the heavy door of the sealing hall closed behind them with a sound like a sentence ending. Naruto and Kurenai sat on the stone platform, side by side, in the center of the room that contained the complete knowledge of his ancestors, and the keeper faded into the walls, and the seal work dimmed to a soft, steady glow, and they were alone. "Tell me," Kurenai said. "Everything the rite requires. Every detail," he told her. The process was precise. They would enter the bond space together through a meditative technique the archive had given him. In the bond space, they would face each other and state their intent. The bond would read their intent, not the words, but the genuine desire beneath the words. If both partners truly wanted dissolution, the bond would release. If not, it wouldn't. There's a third option, Naruto said. One the archive described that I didn't expect. What? Formalization. If both partners genuinely want the bond to continue, the rite can be used to complete the integration. Full resonance. Permanent bond. The way it was meant to be done, chosen, not accidental. Kurenai was quiet for a long time. The hall's seal work pulsed around them. The Uzumaki spirals on the walls seemed to breathe. So our options are: dissolve the bond if we both want it dissolved, complete the bond if we both want it completed, or remain in limbo if we disagree. The limbo isn't permanent. The bond at its current level will stabilize. It won't keep progressing without active encouragement from both sides. What we have now, the emotional sharing, the tactical integration, the dream space, is roughly what we'd keep. It wouldn't get worse, but it wouldn't resolve. Living with a partial bond. Permanently. Unless we eventually agree on a direction. Kurenai pulled her knees to her chest. It was a posture he'd never seen from her. Compact, self-contained, the body language of someone trying to hold themselves together physically when the emotional architecture was under strain. I told you some of what I feel is mine, she said. Not the bonds, mine. Yeah, I meant it. The hall would have rejected me if I'd lied. I know. But I also meant it when I said the speed and intensity are artificial. A week ago, I thought of you as my colleague's student. A talented, well-meaning boy with more potential than discipline. Now I'm sitting in an ancient ruin holding your hand and telling you about my feelings. That's not natural. That's not how connection develops between two people. No, it's not. So how do I trust what I feel? How do I know which parts are real, and which parts are the bond accelerating something that might never have happened without it? Naruto thought about this. The knowledge of the archive was settling in his mind, and among the vast repositories of sealing technique, he found something relevant: the philosophical writings of the Uzumaki's seal theorists, who had grappled with exactly this question. The Uzumaki had a concept. He said slowly, drawing on the newly acquired knowledge. They called it Kizuna no Tain, the seed of connection. They believed that the resonance bond couldn't create attraction or compatibility from nothing. It could only grow what was already planted, like water on a seed. The seed has to be there first. The bond just provides the conditions for growth. So you're saying the potential was there, between us? The bond seems to think so, and the bond can't lie. She looked at him. Her red eyes were luminous in the hall's soft light, and the bond between them was a living thing, a current of shared awareness that carried every nuance of what they were feeling. Her fear and her hope and her grief and her careful, hard-won readiness to take a risk, and his love. Because that's what it was, he could stop pretending it wasn't. The archive had given him the vocabulary for it, and the hall demanded honesty, and he loved her. He loved her the way the sea loves the shore, endlessly and against all reason. She felt it. Through the bond, the full force of it. He couldn't have hidden it if he'd wanted to, not in this room, not with the seal work demanding truth her breath caught. Naruto? I know the age difference. I know the timing. I know what the village would say. I know all the reasons it doesn't make sense. He looked at his hands. But you asked me to be honest, and the hall requires it, and I'm not going to sit in my ancestors' most sacred space and lie about what's in my heart. You're 17. I'll be 18 in 3 months. And I've been an adult since I was 12, since they gave me a headband and sent me to kill people for my country. Age is a number. What I've lived is a life. She closed her eyes. Through the bond, he felt her defenses, not the walls which had fallen in this room, but the deeper structures, the beliefs she'd built about who she was and what she deserved and what was possible, straining under the weight of what he'd just said. Not breaking, bending. I can't decide this right now, she whispered. I know. I need time. I need to think. I need to be somewhere that isn't this room, where the honesty isn't mandatory and I can lie to myself if I need to, just for a little while until I figure out what's real." He almost laughed. Almost. The Genjutsu mistress wants the right to her own illusions. Her eyes opened. And there it was, the smile. Not an almost smile. A real one. Small, reluctant, cracked open by the absurdity of the observation, but real. The first real smile she'd given him, it transformed her face. It made her look young. It made her look like the woman in the dream space, the one without walls, the one who sat on bridge railings and dangled her feet over water. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." "Okay." He squeezed her hand gently, feeling the bond pulse with the contact, warm and steady. "We don't decide now. We take the knowledge and we leave this room and we give ourselves time. The right will be there when we're ready. And if we never agree, then we live with the partial bond and figure it out as we go. That's what people do. They figure it out." She looked at him. 17 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, whisker marks, the last Uzumaki, sitting in his ancestors' hall with the complete knowledge of his clan in his head, and the hand of a woman 16 years his senior in his own, and a resonance bond singing between them like a love song written in chakra. "You're not what I expected," she said again. And this time, the words carried a warmth that the bond didn't need to translate. "You said that before. It keeps being true." They sat in the hall a while longer, not talking, not needing to. The seal work pulsed around them, the city breathed outside, and the bond hummed its steady note, not resolved, not dissolved, not completed. Just there. A connection between two people who hadn't chosen it and weren't sure what to do with it and were, for the first time, okay with not knowing. Eventually, they stood. They walked to the door. Naruto paused at the threshold and looked back at the keeper, who had materialized near the platform, watching them with her ancient smile. "Thank you," he said. "Come back," the keeper said. "Whatever you decide, come back." They stepped through the door into the fading light of a late afternoon in Yuzashio. The ruins stretched around them, the seal work dimming as the sun dropped, the city settling back into its long, patient sleep. Shikamaru was leaning against a wall, journal out. Yamato sat on a broken column, whittling a piece of wood with a kunai. They both looked up as the door opened. "Took you long enough," Shikamaru said. His eyes moved between them, their joined hands, their expressions, the quality of silence around them. He didn't comment. He read it, cataloged it, and filed it away. "We have what we need," Naruto said. "The complete sealing tradition and the dissolution rite. And we're not using it yet." Shikamaru's eyebrow rose, Yamato's whittling paused. "Not yet," Kurenai said. "We need time." Shikamaru looked at her. Looked at Naruto, looked at their hands. "Okay," he said, and nothing else. They made camp in a sheltered courtyard near the spiral quarter within the protective range of the sealing hall's barrier seals. Yamato built a shelter. Shikamaru cooked. Naruto sat against a wall and closed his eyes and let the archive's knowledge continue settling into his mind. The vast inheritance of his clan finding its home in the last brain that could hold it. Kurenai sat beside him. Not touching, they'd released each other's hands at the courtyard's edge, a mutual, unspoken agreement to return to boundaries while they processed, but close. Within arm's reach, the sun went down. The ruins went dark. The seal work glowed faintly, a constellation of spirals in the darkness, and the sea murmured against the cliffs, and two people who had been alone for too long sat side by side in the ruins of a dead village and were, for the moment, not alone. The bond hummed. The stars came out. And somewhere far to the south, in a room beneath Konoha's streets, Danzo Shimura studied a report from a 3-person team that had returned to the village 6 hours ago with a declined offer and a bruised operative, and he said quietly to the darkness, "Begin Phase 2. Chapter 5. Unraveling the morning came cold and salt-heavy, the sea wind cutting through the ruins like a blade drawn slow across skin. Naruto woke with the archive still settling behind his eyes, vast, layered, a library that breathed. He dreamed of spirals, not the bridge, not the stone room. Just spirals, turning inward, folding over themselves, carrying him deeper into something he didn't have a name for yet. Kurenai was already awake. She sat cross-legged at the edge of the courtyard, facing the sea, running through what he recognized as her morning meditation, the Genjutsu kata performed internally, all focus and no movement. Through the bond, she was a still lake, perfectly controlled. Whatever turbulence their conversation in the ceiling hall had created, she'd spent the night smoothing it into something she could carry. He didn't interrupt. He went to the courtyard's edge and relieved Yamato on watch. "Quiet night," Yamato said, standing and stretching. The barrier seals around the spiral quarter are still active. Nothing gets in without Uzumaki authorization. "Safest I've felt since we left Konoha. Go sleep. I've got it." Yamato went. Naruto settled into the watch position and extended his sensor array outward, through the ruins, past the outer walls, to the coastline and the water beyond. Nothing. Empty sea, empty sky, the distant signatures of fish and seabirds. The island was theirs. But the archive whispered to him that Yuzashio had been attacked once before by people who had crossed that same empty sea, and the city's defenders had thought they were safe too. He kept watching. Shikamaru emerged from the shelter an hour later, his hair loose and his eyes carrying the sharp focus of someone who had been thinking before they were fully awake. "We need to talk logistics," he said, settling beside Naruto with a ration bar and his field journal. "We've been on the island for a day. The mission window is 2 weeks total, and we've used 7 days of travel. That gives us 7 days remaining, -4 for the return trip. 3 days on the island. 3 days should be enough. I have the archive. The dissolution rite is clear." "You said you're not using it yet." "Not yet, but having it and choosing when to use it is different from not having it at all." Shikamaru unwrapped the ration bar and ate methodically, his gaze on the ruins. "The real constraint isn't time on the island, it's what's waiting back home. Danzo sent a team after us in Hot Springs country. He's going to send more, and when we get back to Konoha, the political situation will have evolved." "Evolved how?" "Danzo is patient, but he's not passive. 7 days is enough time for him to build a case. He'll go to the advisory council, maybe the full council, with whatever intelligence he's gathered. Frame it as a security concern. The village's Jinchuriki under the influence of an unknown and potentially hostile seal technique. He'll demand oversight, examination. Containment, if he can get the votes." The word containment sat in Naruto's gut like a swallowed stone. He'd spent his entire life as a container. The idea of being contained himself was the kind of irony that didn't make anyone laugh. "Tsunade will push back," Naruto said. "Tsunade will push back, and Danzo will have prepared for that. He's been undermining her authority for years, one careful cut at a time. This is the kind of issue he excels at, taking something personal and making it political, turning a private situation into a public crisis." "So what do we do?" Shikamaru was quiet for a moment. He finished the ration bar and folded the wrapper into a precise square and tucked it into his pocket, because even in the ruins of a dead city, he wasn't going to litter. "We control the narrative before he does. When we return to Konoha, we don't sneak back in. We report directly to Tsunade with a complete account of the archive's contents and the dissolution option. We frame it as a strategic asset, not a liability. The complete Uzumaki sealing tradition, recovered and preserved by Konoha's own Jinchuriki. That's not a security concern, it's a triumph. Danzo can't argue against bringing home the most significant sealing knowledge since the founding of the village. And the bond? The bond is a private matter between 2 consenting shinobi, managed under the Hokage's medical authority. It's not a weapon. It's not a threat. It's a medical condition being treated by the appropriate authority. If Danzo wants to challenge that framing, he has to admit that he's been conducting unauthorized surveillance on Konoha shinobi, which undermines his own position. Naruto stared at him. "You've been thinking about this since yesterday." "I've been thinking about this since the hospital," Shikamaru almost smiled. "It's what I do." They briefed the full team over breakfast, cold rations eaten on rubble, the romantic glory of field operations. Shikamaru laid out the political landscape and the strategy for return. Yamato listened with the calm attention of a career operative absorbing mission parameters. Kurenai listened with something else, a sharpness that went beyond tactical interest, the bond as a medical condition. She said when Shikamaru finished, "Managed by the Hokage's medical authority, not a weapon, not a threat. That's the framing. It's a good framing, but it only works if the bond remains a medical condition." She looked at Naruto. The look was direct, professional, and beneath the surface through the bond he felt the carefully managed complexity of what she was actually thinking. If the bond becomes something else, something voluntary, something chosen, the framing collapses. Danzo would argue that two shinobi deliberately maintaining an Uzumaki combat bond constitutes an unauthorized military enhancement, which falls under his advisory purview. The implication was precise as a kunai throw. If they chose to keep the bond, if they formalized it instead of dissolving it, Danzo would have a legitimate political angle. A voluntary resonance bond between the Jinchuriki and a Jounin was, in the most clinical interpretation, a military asset. And military assets fell within the scope of the Advisory Council's oversight. "You're saying that choosing to keep the bond puts a target on both of us," Naruto said. "I'm saying that the political cost of keeping the bond is significant, and it should factor into our decision." "It shouldn't." "It has to." "No, it doesn't." He leaned forward. "I'm not going to let Danzo's politics decide what happens between us. That's exactly what he wants, for every personal choice to become a political calculation. That's how he controls people. Being aware of political reality isn't being controlled by it. There's a line between awareness and letting it dictate your choices. You know where that line is." Kurenai held his gaze. Through the bond, their emotions were a complex weave. His stubbornness, her pragmatism, his idealism, her experience. They weren't arguing exactly. They were grinding against each other the way two strong-willed people do when they care about the same outcome but disagree on the approach. Shikamaru watched them the way he watched shogi matches, tracking the flow, anticipating moves, staying 3 steps ahead of both players. "We don't need to resolve this today," Yamato said quietly. "We have 3 days on the island. Use them." They did. Naruto spent the first day in the sealing hall. Not the full day. Kurenai insisted on proximity, and the bond agreed, its low hum of contentment whenever she was near making its preference clear. She sat in the hall's entrance, reading through fragments of text that the activated seal work had made visible on the walls, while Naruto stood at the center of the room and let the archive unfold. The knowledge was organized by the Keeper's design, layered so that foundational understanding came first and advanced applications built naturally on top. The process was like learning to read again, each new insight enabling the next, each connection illuminating connections further ahead. By midday, Naruto's understanding of Uzumaki sealing had expanded from the rough competence of a self-taught practitioner to something approaching mastery. Not mastery itself, that would take years of practice, but the theoretical foundation. He knew what was possible. He knew the grammar. The rest was vocabulary, and vocabulary came with time. The dissolution rite was part of this larger understanding. Situated within the tradition, it made perfect sense, not a fail-safe or an emergency procedure, but a natural complement to the bonding rite. The Uzumaki had believed that the resonance bond, like any living thing, should exist only as long as it served the people within it. A bond that was held against someone's will was a prison, and the Uzumaki had strong feelings about prisons. They were, after all, the clan that had made sealing its art, the art of containing things. They understood better than anyone that containment without consent was cruelty, so the dissolution rite existed. Simple, clean, elegant, enter the bond space together, face each other. State your truth. If the truth was separation, the bond would release you. If the truth was union, the bond would deepen. And if the truth was uncertainty, the bond would wait, patient as the sea, until you figured it out. The Uzumaki had built mercy into their strongest technique. Naruto found that this made him want to cry, and he didn't fully understand why until the archive offered the context. The dissolution rite had been added to the tradition by a seal master named Uzumaki Mira, who had watched her daughter suffer in a resonance bond with a partner who had become abusive. The original bond design had no exit. Mira had spent 30 years creating one, and her daughter had been the first person to use it. And the record of that dissolution described it as simultaneously the most painful and the most liberating experience of the woman's life. Naruto sat on the platform and pressed his hands to the stone and felt the weight.